Hey everyone, welcome to a Sunday episode of Crypto with English. So we're going to go in a slightly different, direction today. And periodically I do like to, shake it up a little bit and flip the script. So today we're going to focus on neurodivergence in the era of the Web3 workforce, and we're going to define and describe and go into the nuances of what exactly is, neurodivergence. So I'd like to warmly welcome a special guest today, Alex Pearson. Now, she is a IO psychologist, so that means industry organizational psychologist. She specifically works with, essentially corporate workforces. She's a IO psychologist practitioner and an autistic entrepreneur and advocate. So this is somebody who has beyond just a mere academic familiarity. This is somebody who also has her own experience, both entailing the successes and obstacles and kind of the journey going through, all of those things as well. So we're going to deep dive into really the autism subject matter, the autism spectrum subject matter, because as time goes on, there is more and more awareness, information, and knowledge. And I think a lot of things that were dismissed as maybe just being merely deficient are now essentially being changed and looked at in a much different way. And this will also change the way companies and organizations are going to harness the talent of otherwise a very misunderstood, segment of the workforce. By the way, which is large and broader than I think many of us, would imagine. So Alex, thank you very much for coming on to the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. Great intro. Thank you so much. I think what we can do really quickly, I'd love to kind of define industrial organizational psychology, because it's a mouthful. It's a mouthful. Yes. And often when I bring it up, when I talk about it, people are like, what is that? I haven't heard of that before. And really, it's an incredible career option for people. So I'm talking about it too, especially when I'm talking to universities. I'm like, hey, if you are someone who wants to make a difference in how workplaces are organized and managed and run, and especially like if you're somebody who is interested in representing employee voice and employee experience, right? That's something we don't see a lot in like management consulting, right? And management consulting, you're seeing a lot of, a person interacting with people at the top, making a lot of decisions, and then it's affecting people at the bottom. So what an IO psychologist does is it says, hey, this is your workforce. Like we need to represent the person's voice and the person's experience, right? And so what can we do to design better workspaces? Informationally, so how the roles are defined and how much workload is within those roles, but also well-being wise. So how are those interactions going between employees and leaders, right? How can we make those interactions better? And how can we develop that relationship to be more like a partnership and less like I'm up here and you're down here and this is the divide between us, right? So I would say at least my angle of industrial organizational psychology is really that DEI component, that diversity, equity, inclusion component, but also that how can we build just better relationships with each other, and kind of taking a trauma-informed approach to that, right? So I'll define really quickly what I is and what O is. So they're two totally different fields. It's so fascinating. This degree prepares you for like a billion jobs. It's really very cool. So industrial psychology is much more of like the statistician pieces of things. So you're building trainings, you're doing job analysis, you're defining and building selection systems that are based on science. And so IO has actually just been now brought into STEM it's been recognized as a STEM career now, because what we're doing is we're bringing research-informed practice into organizations, but we're employing it through research methods. So we're not guessing. We're taking very informed hypotheses. We're measuring if it works, and we're seeing what the outcomes are, right? It's very research-based, which is very exciting. The organizational side of IO psychology is much more of that kind of touchy-feely component. It's those intangibles, right? So leadership development. How are we developing leaders to truly be impactful, transformational leadership, right? How are we impacting that? And how are we impacting workspaces so that people feel comfortable and confident and capable, right? People feel capable. And how do we include employees more in the conversation, right? Because what we've learned in IO psychology is that people aren't motivated when they don't have a sense of autonomy in their job. People aren't motivated when they don't feel like they're part of something larger than themselves. People don't want to feel like they're left out of the picture, right? And so there's a lot of different ways you can do that. And IO Psych prepares you for like so many different kinds of opportunities. It's really exciting. So I just wanted to define IO because it's like, what is it? You know?
No, that's
And
perfect.
so,
Thank you.
yeah, totally. And like folding this idea of neurodiversity into IO is so exciting because neurodivergence is something that is so misunderstood. But as you've said, there's such a side to this that is so empowering. And to really shift it to a more empowering culture, you have to we have to humanize each other, right?
Yeah.
And what happens a lot of the time when how neurodivergence empowers us to build empathy with each other is that we talk about neurodivergence as, you know, everybody has different brains, everybody has different ways that they've adapted to their environments and their circumstances, right? We all kind of have this uniqueness. We all have unique fingerprints. We need to remember that we all can relate to these concepts, right? Because if we otherize people who are autistic, if we otherize people who are ADHD, if we otherize people who have PTSD, we no longer see the humanness in someone anymore, right? That's literally what stigma is. And I'll just quickly plug, I just had a research paper get published in Zambia.
Oh, awesome.
Thank you. And thank you. I'm really excited about that. It was my first authorship publication. And what we did is we studied stigma in Zambia. We studied stigma specifically of autism spectrum disorder in Zambia. And what we found is a lot of the struggles people have around autism are community stigma related and self-stigma related. So it's people not understanding what autism is behind a bunch of behaviors that are deemed not neurotypical, right? So it's really been, autism has been pathologized for so long, it's been misunderstood for so long because in academic literature, it's really all written from not only neurotypical perspectives, right? It's really hard to understand autism if you're not autistic. Extremely hard, right? And so what's happening is a lot of researchers who have published on autism have published, it's all been a disorder, right? A behavioral disorder. And so, you know, the definition of autism is literally social communication deficits, right? So think about that term deficits. So we're already talking about it like it's, you know, you're socially defective, right? So that's what separates a human
the definition
from not
already
human.
places a stigma on this.
Totally. It's like, how else can you conceptualize that or feel it? Like, how can you have any positive feeling or understanding of a condition that says social communication deficits, issues with social emotional reciprocity? I mean, they're very, very harmful terms that that for a person who is disabled, and even for someone who's not reading that, it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable, right? And so it's easier just to otherize, separate, pretend it, you know, like separate yourself from it. Okay, so number 2 is this restrictive and repetitive behaviors and interests, right? Restricted and repetitive behaviors and interests. So there's a couple of ways that manifests. One is abnormal in intensity and focus on particular subjects. So why are we calling it a disorder when people are just really into subjects they love?
Right. And, you know, it seems like as time goes on, more and more scholarship has come out that, you know, perhaps some of these great people throughout history that have been widely respected are highly likely to have been autistic. So this includes people like, you know, Leonardo da Vinci, you know, and other famous physicists and mathematicians and, you know, programmers. You know, it seems there might be a great miscommunication or mischaracterization of, I think, the way autism is presented.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so you hit on something really important there. You brought up some people that have specialties, some really incredible specialties, some really incredible strengths in these particular areas, right? And so what we call that is we call that specialist thinkers versus generalist thinkers, right? And so if we think about how school systems are set up, they're set up to produce all of the same types of people, right? It's like we're going to learn all the same subjects in all the same ways, and we're just going to learn kind of the surface level of things and not go too deep. The autistic people are often struggling in these school settings because, don't really care about this subject, or this subject, but this subject, oh my God. Like, I know everything, I probably college level, if not grad level understanding at, you know, in 6th grade, 7th grade of some of these things. Or 9th grade, 10th grade, probably a little too young there. But you know what I'm saying, right? It's that we have these incredible skills and talents, but the way that students are measured and graded, it's around this generalist knowledge. Right. And so then it's then the autistic child is not seen for the skills that they have and the interests that they are great at. They're seen as, oh, here's all of your deficits in the school setting. Right. And so this sort of specialist thinking is what enables us to chart forward the future in so many of these different fields like you're talking about. And, and when you and I first met, we talked about how, in the Web3 era and in the crypto era, you're like, all these people running this stuff, they're probably autistic, right?
Well, I didn't characterize people as that, but it does require a very type of intense focus. And I guess you could say almost a specialist or a specialized type of drive and interest. Because most people that I know who are in this space, they really like it. And they genuinely make it kind of part of their daily life. And in fact, in many ways, I've seldom ever met somebody who's just casually interested in this. So, for me, I think it's funny because the educational system, like you said, tries to make generalists out of everybody, so to say. But the fact of the matter is, in the workforce, that tends to be what companies want. They want specialists. They want subject matter experts. Right. They don't kind of want anybody who just kind of knows a little bit of everything. And, this is reflected in medicine. It's reflected in law. It's reflected in tech. So where do you think the systems dropped the ball on that?
I'm so sorry. I was thinking of a totally different topic I was going to say.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I probably went down a rabbit hole with that question. But
I was like,
no worries.
I just wanted to expand on something you said that I thought was so important. I wanted to expand on this idea because I was thinking back to your episode with Linda and Tracy, and I was thinking about this idea of creative capital, right? Sure. And how they were mentioning towards the end of the episode, they were talking about how it's likely that 70% of W-2 jobs are going to go away, right?
Yeah.
And they were talking about how, they were talking about how what the workforce is going to be looking for, what these companies are going to be needing and looking for, because a lot of jobs are going to be automated. A lot of the jobs that, where you would put a generalist in there that could kind of figure out something, a lot of those jobs are now going to be automated, right?
Right.
And so what's going to happen is you do need these specialist thinkers, right? And you need these specialist thinkers to know their own worth and to know their own power. And to understand what creative capital is and how they fit into that sort of future of work, right?
Right.
And I bring this up because I will tell you, I'm a professional coach, and I work with autistic professionals and neurodivergent professionals. Sure. These are the most brilliant people I've met in my life. Like, I am so amazed by every single one that I work with. None of them know that they're smart. None of them know how to put a resume together. None of them know how to describe their skill set. Right?
I see.
And we're in a world where 75% of people lie on their resumes. But then you have autistic people who majorly undersell on their resumes and do not put all of their skills on their resumes and do not think to tailor it in a certain way or to map on things in the job description or write in extra things that they don't know. No, they're not doing that. And so we have these really creative geniuses that are not in these positions they should be in because of self-stigma, because we just don't know ourselves well, and we don't know our worth. And so I just wanted to mention that because I think when we were talking about moving forward and how the workforce is going to change, we really need to empower these creative geniuses to understand what their creative abilities are and what neurodivergence means to them, and how neurodivergence, the concept and the movement, can help them to find a space where they belong, and then build up that self-esteem and build up that ability to go and get those positions that they're qualified for. Right. So I just wanted to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go a different direction.
No, not at all. So, so the term, I guess the proper term to use is neurotypical, right? So that is essentially the standard or the grade that you could say the educational system and both you could say the workforce is built around. Mm-hmm. What is kind of the general or common way of people to perform functions and learn, so to say.
Yes.
So why do you think autism is so misunderstood? Because, if I was to look at it, I would look at it, okay, this person may just have a different way of doing things, but if it's just as effective, if not more, I think let it happen. Let's rock. Why not permit and allow, more of that? I mean, it seems to me, is this mischaracterization? Is this really based on mere misunderstanding? Is there some sort of maybe even a resentment towards people who are uniquely talented? It makes me wonder sometimes, so to say, are people's inner fears or resentments and maybe you could even say mediocrity trying to maybe stand in the way of some of these individuals and maybe stop them from shining, so to say?
Sure, that's a great question. So there's a couple of things we can talk about there. So number one, autistic people are very literal communicators, very, very literal, right? So we are not, whereas a lot of okay, so the power of culture in a particular country or even city, the power of culture is that culture can kind of get everybody on the same page. It's shared beliefs, it's shared practices, right? There's great things about culture, but also there are things about culture that are otherizing, right? If you don't fit into this culture, if you don't do these things or say these things or act this way or believe in these things or value these things like I do, then you're not part of my culture, right? And so I was actually just talking about this concept with my parents this morning because I was like, you know, I feel like, I mean, there's a whole autistic culture that is so different, right? Because if you think about neurotypical culture, and I'm just going to talk about maybe neurotypical college culture for a second, right? You know, as I was pretending to be a neurotypical in college, I was, you know, you can't info dump about the topics you like because nobody cares or wants to listen, right? So there's one of those things. You got to drink a lot of alcohol and go to all these parties to be liked. And it doesn't even matter if I'm like, how are you getting to know these people? You're just like getting really drunk with them? I don't understand. So there's all these things and these cultures that it seems like everybody's participating in this stuff. And so where the autistic person isn't finding their personal powers, they're not realizing, okay, I'm not neurotypical. And it's okay that I have a different culture that I would like to participate in, right? A parallel culture, which is like, or maybe an oppositional culture, which is like hanging out with people that are also very specialist in a certain thing. And we just talk about that all the time, right? So I have a lot of friends where I'm seriously like deep diving into psychology topics and like existential topics with them. And that's like how our friendship is just a collection of these conversations. And that's my preference of a friendship. Or maybe some of my friendships are mostly textually based, right? So I have friends in different countries. I just text with them, right? And I'm bringing this up because it's this whole cultural versus literal communication. It's the fact that I can meet an autistic person in any country and somehow feel like I'm already there. I know everything about them. I understand them. We're on the same page. It's just really incredible. It's something I've learned. There's this just autism culture that is so different, and it just breaks across any cultural barriers in the world. I have a friend in South Africa I'm working with, and it's like we're just on the same page at all times. We understand each other. We understand each other's minds and our ways of operating and processing. And so I guess I don't know if this really answered your question, but I think understanding, like, you know, what is this social reality pattern that neurotypicals are living in? What is this social reality that they're living in? And what patterns are they following? And does that have to be my social reality? Right? Does it have to be? No. And so we're feeling very otherized, and that's where we're losing a lot of our self-confidence and self-esteem, especially if we don't know we're neurodiverse, because we're trying to push ourselves into every neurotypical space the way that we're observing it's supposed to happen, if that makes sense. We're like little scientists.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, it's obviously hard to diagnose or, you know, truly examine people who are already dead. But if you look throughout history, and like I said, whether you look at let's say the Leonardo da Vinci's of the world, the Thomas Edisons of the world, the Nikola Teslas of the world, you know, these are people who would probably otherwise be considered eccentric or a little out of the ordinary in today's society. So, you know, I'm thinking to myself, like, you know, as far as a school system and also being a parent, don't you want your children to aspire to be like that versus just kind of being like everybody else? So, I mean, are doing things a little different? Is that really so bad? You know, so to say, you know, if, you know, I think if you need to do something unique to maybe better contextualize the world, I feel, why not explore that? Maybe why not encourage that? In fact,
absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
So
sorry, go ahead.
No, continue.
You're good. No, I was just going to say something that can, I think also, so some of my work around stigma and Zambia, something I learned about that is, and how it folds into the neurodiversity movement is we can use this term neurodivergence, and we can talk about, and I would love to define this with you right now, because I'm sure some people
listening, by all means.
Yeah, totally. I'm sure some people listening might not know what it is, and that's what I'm here for. So it's really helpful it also represents a larger percentage of the population, because, you know, autistic people are little few and far between. There's more of us now for sure, but it's definitely not as prevalent as some other conditions, right?
Right.
And so what we do when we talk about neurodiversity as a concept is we can talk about the ways that autistic people relate to ADHD people, relate to people with anxiety, relate to, right? There's so many ways we can relate to each other, and we can humanize the condition now when we're talking about a larger subset of the population that experiences mental health conditions, right? So, and I will say I am literally representative of like 4 different mental health conditions. So not only am I autistic, I'm ADHD. I also have CPTSD and PTSD. And that is the difference there is, so this is something that actually is changing a lot of people's lives to learn about CPTSD, because we really haven't had a term in the DSM and CPTSD is not yet in the DSM. I can see people correcting me right now. CPTSD is not in the DSM yet, but complex trauma is. And what that is it's a different kind of trauma, more severe kind of trauma than PTSD, because it's so many repeated events of trauma over a period of time, right? So this is representative of childhood trauma or of relational abuse. And what we see is that about 66% of Americans have experienced an adverse childhood experience, right? So now we're not even just talking about neurodivergence, we're talking about just experiences with trauma in life, right? And you see that PTSD and autism overlap around 60% in some cases. So we see that autistic people are traumatized continuously because we don't feel that we belong. And there's, if we think about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I'm sure you've heard of, it's the, that you need your physical needs taken care of. You need your emotional needs taken care of. You need like to be eating and sleeping and all these things. But there's this really important piece called esteem needs, right? And that's like the third need. And autistic people, we're not getting there, right? We're not getting to the esteem needs because we're like, when people don't relate to a certain condition and otherize it, where's the space for us to exist, right? And then it feels like the only space for us to exist is in a neurotypical space, and then we reject ourselves because we can't be ourselves in those spaces, right? So do you see how this creates these continuous loops of trauma? Right?
No, that makes sense for sure.
Yeah, totally. So so I have anxiety also and depression, and so neurodivergency, it's depending where you look, you can see different percentages depending on how it's defined. But the one I prefer, because I like to include mental health conditions in general and neurodivergency, because it's just that's overlaps with everything. So it's around 20 to 40% of the population is neurodivergent. If we're including anxiety, depression, even traumatic brain injuries are included in there, and mood disorders like bipolar, and personality disorders like NPD and borderline. When we're including all these conditions under the umbrella of neurodivergency, we're no longer looking and picking apart those particular conditions and stereotyping, right? Because that's what happens. You hear autistic, and I think for a lot of people that don't know it, they think, oh, not relatable, like unkind or unfriendly. They're putting all of these thoughts and they're projecting these stereotypes. And this is what we found in the study in Zambia. Is autism was looked down upon in the community as it was caused by cold parenting, like you weren't a good enough parent to your child and that's why they're autistic, or God put a curse on your child and that's why they're autistic, instead of really like what are the gifts here, and how do we support this child, and how do we create an environment for this child. It's more about this child doesn't fit into this society, they don't go, so put them somewhere else, right? Very, very, very dehumanizing. It's very sad. It's very sad. And so that just creates so much self-stigma and things like that. And so neurodivergence gives back power not only to the neurodivergent person, but it helps the larger audience and the larger world understand, like, oh my gosh, yeah, it's just a different way of thinking and being and processing. It's a different way of processing the world. It's a different way of experiencing the world. It's a different background people have. And we just need different supports because we have different needs, right? And so when I'm consulting with individuals and helping them to get their accommodations and things like that, people are so scared to say what their conditions are at their workplaces or to their friends or to their families, because they're like, if I tell my boss I'm autistic, and then they go look it up online and read about all of these struggles I have, how are they going to see me now how are they going to see me? Right? They're not going to see me or they're going to project onto me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to project onto me all that they're reading about, or all that they're seeing, like, oh, it's going to be too much work for me. Oh, nope. Right. And so this word neurodivergence gives us this amazing language to just really, we're describing needs. We're describing needs, but we're also describing, this is what empowers me. These are the environments and the contexts that empower me, and that empower you through empowering me, right? Empower our organization because I can deliver better work, because I can get more done, because I can feel better about, right? All these self-confidence, self-esteem, all of this is related to the outputs that you're getting from people. And it builds connection, it builds community, and it builds commitment between those employees and those employers when they're seeing us as we are seeing us as people instead of as conditions. And I think that's the power of the word neurodivergence.
Interesting. Well, first and foremost, I have to say that it's very courageous and bold of you to share that about yourself. And I would imagine, you know, doing that, as tough as it is, I think it makes you an asset, especially when you're counseling and coaching people, because I think people would prefer, excuse me, people would prefer to actually have somebody who's kind of in their corner and, you know, has experience and have some context about this, you know, versus, you know, somebody who maybe only has some kind of academic familiarity with it, you know, so to say. So I can imagine you could understand and pick up on those nuances and, you know, I guess you could say those, you know, slight, subtle cues, whether it's in behavior or in speech or things like that.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I think, you know, I want to talk about for a quick second too, like getting neurotypicals on board with everything. Right. So that's really important, right? Because as we've talked about a little bit, like we have a society that's majority neurotypical, that's majority constructed by neurotypicals. And so, you know, where people get concerned about disclosing if they're neurodivergent and getting their needs met is they're worried about being backed down of like, no, you're not going to get special treatment here. Right. That's the concern that people have time and time again. And what ActuallyAlex, the company that I started, is working to do is creating these environments where neurotypicals are also getting their needs met, right? And it's like, yes, I'm autistic and I have these particular needs because of my particular processing style, but you have your own particular needs too, neurotypical. You have your own processing styles and you have your own ways of working. So think about how much more people are benefiting from like flex work schedules, right? From like the work from home and stuff like that from COVID. I mean, the work from home movement has opened up such a world for autistic people, and they're learning for the first time that they can sustainably work if they have more choice around what times they're working and where they're working from. And that's something that under ADA has been, you know, an autistic accommodation forever. But what's so cool is that's kind of like everybody got that accommodation for a couple of years, right? And then they learned, and so we see this great resignation and all this stuff. People are learning there's different ways to work and to be, right? And so it's crazy. We have this perfect storm right now where organizations are they're really needing to treat their employees like clients to keep them. Right.
And yeah, absolutely. And I would imagine if we were to look at success rates as far as, you know, across, you know, academia and beyond, but I would imagine people that make up the top of the curve, whether it's a grading curve or otherwise, those in no way, they can't all be neurodivergent people. In fact, I would imagine it's a very, very mixed bag, you know, so to say. So, you know, my feeling is, it's probably about time to kind of discard with a lot of this neurotypical, you know, model. I think if we were to look at the numbers even deeper, I think maybe from an anecdotal sense, I'm sure we can all remember or recall people who were, let's say, genuine experts, masters, or, you know, extremely high performers in their field, whether it's in school or sport or some type of skill. From my memory, from people I know, they tend to be people who have their own method and do things a little differently. I mean, they could in many ways just be people who work more efficient and smarter, you know, than others. So, you know, it kind of, you know, rationally, it kind of makes me wonder, why do companies, or why is culture still holding on to the neurotypical model if in fact, if you want to encourage more of those extremely high performers,
Yep.
probably it should be expanding or
Yeah.
broadening, kind of the culture to include that.
Sure, sure. So a lot of the way things are is it's one of those things where it's like, oh, this is the way things have always been done, right? And
Right.
so the reason why organizations operate the way they do this, actually, I love it. You asked me an IO psychology question. Yay.
Oh,
Okay.
awesome.
So I love it. If we're talking about like the Industrial Revolution, a lot of our work practices and policies were created in that time and just didn't change. So what happened was we were all in like these production schedules of, okay, people are literally producing tangible things per hour, right? So you need to have people in a room for a certain amount of hours to get the amount of production that you need, right? And so that's where the 8 to 5 or whether it really used to be more like 10 or 12-hour work days. I think there was more like then, workers started to say like, that's impossible. I can't do it.
Yeah.
And then it was reduced to 8 hours, but even 8 hours, it's a completely arbitrary number. And we haven't considered too, like how much more horsepower we have now, right? So when we're talking about like the rise of computer intelligence, artificial intelligence, and just how many more resources we have, it's like we have to redesign our world now to include like to account for these big shifts since the Industrial Revolution. Right? It's like we don't need to operate the same way because we have this technology that makes things faster and better. So why are we making, like if productivity has increased however much X hundreds of percentages, we used to have people just hand writing things and hand coding things. And now we have, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Like we have ways to automate the ways that we're working to make it faster. So shouldn't humans be benefiting from that by getting a more relaxed work life and a more like we have a more livable society now where, there are going to be, a lot of our jobs are going to go away and they're getting easier because we have technology to help us. And so it's that we have to recognize we can't just run things the way that they've always been run. And I think what a lot of companies forget about is that you can ask your people what they need, how they would like to work. You can include them in that conversation. You can make it a data-based conversation so that then people trust you and they can kind of have a stake in designing what the future of work looks like for them in their company. Right. So there's ways that we can do this in partnership with our employees. And this is really what I'm preaching as an IO psychologist is let's start doing this on the person level. You're an individual. Let's say all that I can change, I can't change the way a company runs. I can't change the way the world runs, but I can change how me and my position in my job, how that job works, how it's structured around me. Right. I can do this for myself between me and my manager or within my team at a local level. Let's start to make change at those levels and see what kind of productivity we get out of that, right? And so that's the power of accommodation. It's what kinds of ways can I work and should I work? And what kinds of ways do I need information to be able to do my job the best that I can? Because a lot of organizations live in this kind of gray space of ambiguity sometimes with job design and with job descriptions. And then people just aren't on the same page, right? So.
Yeah. By the way, very well said. And, maybe I think it's time society rethinks the model. I think efficiency equals results, not necessarily productivity. You can be productive, but not efficient and not really get to, where you are. I don't think necessarily sweat equals productivity. I think efficiency equals, productivity. If you can do something better, why not do it that way? But I do, you raise a good point, especially regarding the Industrial Revolution. And I know Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company, he was one of the biggest proponents of the 9-to-5 day. And I guess you could say the current work structure, which has been in place for well over 110 years, probably. He wasn't obviously the progenitor or the original creator of it, but certainly one of the biggest proponents of it. And that was when most society, at least the labor force in big cities, tended to be, within factories. So, it makes me wonder if our manufacturing base is gone for the most part in this country, why are we still even using, that model of essentially the conveyor belt kind of day,
Right, exactly.
These are just kind of things that come to mind.
Exactly. And, okay, so two things. Number one, I think in tech, so the reason why tech is kind of ahead here in terms of more hybrid working and different kinds of, like you'll see very different kinds of cultures, even in the tech departments of big companies, right? They just totally run differently. And it's because in tech, like you see people that are burst workers, right? So they can grind really, really hard for 4 or 5 hours and do 2 weeks worth of coding or something, right? And that's their way.
I like that term, like, burst workers. Yeah.
Yeah, burst workers. And like just getting, and this is what we call like ND flow. Like people who are ADHD and autistic have this incredible ability to hyperfocus. Especially like if it's what's so funny is like autistic people can't learn about or care about things they don't care about. But when we do care about something, it's like, oh my God, like I can do weeks worth of work in this subject because it just all connects for me. It's that divergency in thinking. We're systemizers and we have just such an interesting way of thinking. And so a lot of how neurodivergent people work is we're doing a lot of our planning, preparing, thinking. Like I would say I probably work like all the time mentally. But when I'm sitting down to actually get my product done or get my thing made, I want to have planned and thought through all of that beforehand. Like, whereas a neurotypical might stretch a project over 2-3 weeks, I'm going to think about it for a couple of days and then finish the whole thing. Right. And so why are we punishing people who, this is the thing that you said, right? Efficiency, right? Why are we punishing people by saying, sit down in this desk for this amount of hours every day and be just as productive every minute, please? Like that doesn't make sense to me at all.
Especially in 2022, this it's very antiquated and it's not efficient anymore. It probably hasn't been efficient for over 20 years, in my opinion.
It's not. It's not. And then the number 2 thing I wanted to say is, so you just mentioned, you said the 9 to 5 is unnatural, right? Or maybe I said that in my brain. If you didn't say that.
I didn't say it like that, but but that is essentially the theme of what I was communicating. It's not efficient. I think for either neurotypical or neuro divergent, because we're no longer a manufacturing economy. So I think creating a workforce around that, especially if you're in tech or if you're in medicine or if you're in anything else, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And I just want to bring up a fun fact, a psychology fun fact. I'm sure a lot of people know this, but I really had a whole class about this in psych. So we talked about, the entire class wasn't about this, but it was a portion of it. We talked about there's really like people who are nocturnal versus not. Like there are people who legitimately are more, like this is not, there's research and science behind it. Like there are people who are morning people. Literally, who like do very well in the morning, like their brain is working very efficiently in the morning, and that's like their time, and they're burned out by like 3 p.m. There are people that love to work late. My professor, love her to death. She never takes classes before, and this is like kind of her accommodation. So I'm bringing this up because I mean she's not neurodivergent, but she has a nocturnal brain. Like she works so late. I get emails from her at 2 a.m. That's when she feels very productive, and so she doesn't take any courses before 11 a.m. or normally like 2 p.m. ish. And so then like that's when her flow is strong. Like that's when she feels so hyper connected and really like in her flow. Like why would you sit her down and all the times that her brain isn't even on the juice, right? Because I'm gonna run out of all of my energy and then not get into my most fruitful flow. Right?
Then I'll already be gassed out, let's say, before I really, get good at my work, so to say.
Exactly. And then we could go into how really like the 8-hour sleeping thing isn't even a thing, and humans really should be sleeping like a little bit every 4 hours or something like that. There's like such different ways that
and I've heard scholarship about that as well.
Right. And so it's like, why are we not like now we know all this stuff, why are we not accounting for this a little bit in our what we spend how much time working, and we're not thinking about how to create like a great human condition for everybody, right?
Yeah.
It just seems like it benefits everyone. But then again, Adam, it's really that, this is how everything's been done, so why change it? And, going back, and I'm just going to bring it full circle here, going back to talking about the school system, you said, how would you change it? Like, what would you do to make it more inclusive, right? Everything, and not only are things taught in a generalist way, school teaches you linear and convergent thinking. School teaches you to think linearly and to think convergently, what I mean by that is, doesn't everybody agree on this thing? That makes it right. Right. And so that's like, is that not facilitating kind of groupthink, right? It's facilitating, if everybody says something's good, then it's probably right. And so then we lose that autonomy of thinking. We lose that divergency of thinking and that critical thinking. And I will tell you, Adam, like this is how I know I'm autistic. too. I was the student that, like, when the teacher would say something, I would say, well, what about this idea? Or what about this angle? Or what
Right.
about this thing? Right.
Right.
And I'm sure everybody thought I was so annoying, but but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, that needs to be encouraged. Like, we need to be
Yeah.
talking
Indeed.
about how to make school more divergent thinking than convergent thinking, right? We want to
Right.
be able, like, I think it's much more interesting to give students open-ended questions and open-ended tests where they're able to construct their own version of understanding or explain, because we don't want to teach people to just be outputting the same things, right?
Right.
We want people to feel like they have this intellectual horsepower, they have their own perspective, they have this different, like, this fluid intelligence and this ability to think in different solutions, right? Because the way school is structured right now, it's like it's more about remember, I have a lot of autistic friends that talk about this too. It's like you're really just taking the teacher's course of how the teacher thinks about something, right?
Yeah, and in fact, you're really kind of just regurgitating what the teacher is interested in when it comes to the final exam. In my experience, it's
Exactly.
it's not necessarily your mastery, it's really what questions the teacher's going to ask or what they're particularly
Beautifully
interested
put.
in. So you kind of study to what the teacher's saying, not really per se what the material, is
Exactly.
about.
Oh my gosh. And it's exactly. And so just as a young autistic girl, I remember in my in one of my psychology classes, I was taking my test and I had studied I just memorized everything, I just read everything in the book, and like I just really studied super hard for this test, and I took it and I was like, oh, I just disagree with so many of these questions.
Right.
Like, I didn't like the questions on the test.
Right.
I didn't like how they were written. And I was just, instead of I would select an answer and I'd write next to it, this is really, I don't know that this is really representative of the, like, I would just write in my own answers because I was like,
I get
why
it.
not encourage that? Why not encourage people to write in their own answers and to like, wouldn't you want that sort of debate, that healthy debate in a classroom? Like, we need to be doing that more, right? We need to be encouraging that divergence in opinion, and like, no, it's not good if everybody agrees about something. We don't want to, and if that's the case, then we need to make the topic a little more complex or a little bit more fruitful so that we can have different conversations about it, where it's not, this is the only way to think about this thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and by the way, not to get too deep into the abstract, but seldom are things linear, in life. Whether you're trying to solve some sort of global crisis, like whether it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine, if you look at the structures in our everyday life, whether it's our own DNA, it's a helix, whether it's the very cells in our body, they're all systems built upon systems, and different curves and angles and things like that. So maybe one of the few linear things in life, or maybe it's like kind of your straight punch in boxing, but a lot of things, it seems to me, are really more systems. So along the lines of what you're saying, maybe teaching more divergent and abstract thinking is probably going to be very very helpful.
Yes, that, and then I think too, it's like good versus bad information too, right? So I think it's we live in an age where information is so accessible. We live in an age where memorization isn't really that necessary anymore. Like, that's something that has also really changed the way that the world operates and can operate, right? Like, the fact that you can Google anything and learn how to do anything by yourself. Like, that's pretty nuts, right? And I think that
the autodidactic, right?
Yes, there it is. Autodidactic. That's another feature of autism. And then another feature is eidetic memory. We can talk about that in a second. I'm gonna write that down because we should definitely talk about that. So fascinating. Shoot, what was I saying? What were we just talking about before?
Eidetic, and then we were going to go into autodidactic memory.
Autodidactic, yes. Okay, so autistic people, and this is another way that schools and organizations really just have to be more inclusive in design. It's called universal design, because when we're thinking about autism specifically and auditory processing issues, right? Autistics are often autodidacts because we learn so differently. We just have to create our own way of learning because we like the common way of teaching, the lecture format. Is that really the best way of teaching? Right. So that's one of the other things is, I was a student who had I even still struggle with verbal processing on the spot. Like, my learning and my understanding of situations and conversations happen days or weeks later. It's really funny. Like I have such delayed processing. I don't really ever know like what happened until I've.
But
like,
I would imagine
really
you probably have superior, so to say, processing in other ways, so to
Totally.
say. So, I'm kind of wondering, so what is the chemistry of the brain, I guess you could say, versus neurotypical versus
Yeah.
neurodivergent? Like,
Totally.
is there like a different distribution of like
Yes.
gray matter or things like
Yes.
that?
There are some differences for autism. So I'll name a couple of them. So number one, increased white matter and gray matter connectivity.
Okay.
And increased, and that's just more and more thoughts, more and more often and faster.
Right.
And then we also have an increased connectivity between our left and right hemisphere. So our corpus callosum is thicker than average. And so information is able to travel between both sides faster as well. It's just very efficient.
Wow, interesting.
Very efficient.
Yeah.
Very efficient. But the downside of that is we process more information sensory wise, right? And so
Right.
a lot of, this is something that really is coming to the forefront of autistic discussion. It's
Right.
really a difference in our sensory experience, right? We're processing more information, not only verbally and informationally, and our thoughts are all over the place. We're having more thoughts, but like we're hearing sounds more clearly. We're like visually, we're seeing more. Like it's just it's so much input that like that's what causes our shutdowns and our meltdowns and our frustrations. Things is
Right.
that we're getting too much information all the time, and it's too
Right.
loud, and it's too smelly, and it's too many different
Right.
things all at once,
Right.
and it can be really overwhelming. So that's some of the differences there. It's really fascinating. And there's a great book I can just plug really quick. It's
Yeah.
called a field guide to Earthlings. It's really fantastic.
I like the
It's written
title.
by an autistic guy. And he talked about this as this was the very first thing he talked about in the book. And you know that there's sometimes those books that you get and you just like read a concept and you're like, I'm mind blown. Like I
Right.
can't even finish this
Yeah,
book right
yeah,
now
for
because I
sure.
need to percolate on this one concept. And the first concept he covered was the ways that neurotypicals filter that autistics don't, right? And so he explained something really interesting. He said that neurotypicals convert their environment all into symbols. And so that makes it much more efficient
Okay.
for them because then they're not having to process everything. They're just only processing the thing that matters right now,
Okay.
right? And so what I mean by that is, say there's, you're walking on the street and there's you're walking by a big speaker, right? Maybe outside of a restaurant, it's really loud, and then there's a truck
Yeah.
going by, and then somebody's talking to you at the same time. For an autistic person,
Right.
I'm not going to be able to talk or hear that person at all. Like that is way too much information.
Right.
My brain is not filtering. For a neurotypical person, their brain naturally filters out that noise and converts it.
Right.
That's a truck. I don't need to worry about it. That's just a
Right.
sound. Don't need to worry about it. So their
Right.
brain is doing that for them. We don't have that. We do not have that at all. Any of that. And so it's what causes a lot of our stress and executive dysfunction is, yeah, it's so loud. It's so noisy. There's so much going on. And that's why we need these accommodations. Like we need our sensory environment to be predictable. We need our day to be predictable.
Right.
We need to have some semblance of understanding about how things will go and when. And that's why
Yeah.
we like to plan and prepare. And we're usually very organized people because, yeah, we need to have all that in place because we're going to be really overwhelmed if we don't have something to grab onto and hold on to.
Right.
Which is like a way something might go, some things I might be able to say. That's why we do a lot of planning and preparation just around what we might say in a conversation or what we
Right.
might talk to someone about, because once we're in that situation, we know we're going to be so overwhelmed and we're going to need to revert to something we've planned to
Right.
get us through it.
And by the way,
Yeah.
so what do those accommodations include for neurodivergent individuals?
Oh my gosh, yes. Let me just pull up my list, okay? Or I can just name off a few. I'm going to name off a few.
Whatever's
Okay.
easier.
Okay. So, number one is like in a job. So we're gonna talk about jobs. So in a job, maybe some structural accommodations, right? And so the way I've
Right.
written my accommodations list, and I just want to give you an inside tip here.
Sure.
The way I've written my neurodivergence accommodations list is I'm thinking about business outcomes and I'm thinking about how to explain, like in the way I'm framing it, I'm thinking about how can I explain this through the lens of productivity, well-being, right? What outcomes are these going to
Right.
include? Because
Right.
in businesses, they're very motivated around business outcomes. And usually you get your way faster if you're talking about it being a business outcome too.
Right. I
Right.
can imagine.
Yes. And so in IO psychology, often what we're doing is we're coming into businesses and we're figuring out how to build more structure and more predictability into pieces so that people know what they're doing, right?
Right.
And so I'm thinking about this from the perspective of IO, but these are all things that everybody needs, but that neurodivergent people super, super duper need, right?
Right.
So let me pull up my list and I'm going to just read a couple from each one. And I think that way we can get like a holistic perspective of like all the different ways.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so here we go. Give me 1 second here. Okay. All right, so number one would be visual supports. So providing people templates of forms and documents, providing a workflow potentially, like working together to create a visual workflow of like this happens, then this, then this, then this, right? Something that, so these things aren't expensive. Like that's not an expensive or hard thing to do with an employee. Sit down with them.
I think that should be basic everywhere you go, to be honest. There should be a workflow. There should be templates. You know, it saves time. It keeps everything organized. Yeah.
Right. So what's so funny is, right, so you say I present these things and I talk about these things. Many people don't have access to these things, and the business leaders. So I did a talk with SHL in UK, and I was talking to the corporate strategy manager at the very end, and he said, "Yeah, we need to just be doing all this stuff." And I was like, "See, yes, exactly." So it's like neurodivergent people are maybe more visually and like more obviously distressed at their job, but neurotypicals have got to be distressed too. They're just hiding it better. Right?
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so that's why a lot of these accommodations, I'm like, yeah, neurodivergents need this, but neurotypicals, when they see this list, they're like, please, 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 me too. Please, 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 me too. Okay. So
well, let me ask you something. Are neurotypicals more comfortable with, let's say, chaos or disorganization? I don't mean to characterize this in a negative sense, but let's say neurodivergent, there's a greater need to have that organized or systemized. Otherwise, it's just too distracting. So to say.
Okay, yes. I'll jump right back into the accommodation, but I'm gonna answer your question.
Right,
A great point. No. That's a fantastic point. That's actually something that's in the Field Guide to Earthlings book. It answers this question.
I'll have to check
out
that book.
It talks about, you really definitely should. It's super cool. It's really funny too. It's hilarious. Okay, so it's called, so the way that we talk about this, it's the forest versus the trees thinking. Right. So autistic people, so neurotypicals are much more comfortable with having just kind of a broad outline of something, and having there be ambiguity, and they're comfortable not really exploring that ambiguity. Neurodivergents are like, I'm not comfortable with this ambiguity at all, and I'm not going to accept what you say is the forest view until I've explored every single tree in that forest. And I understand what makes up that forest. How does it work? How does it operate? It's that systems thinking, Adam. It's that autistic people are naturally systemizers. There's literally a test that I took for my autism diagnosis called the systemizing quotient. And the way that this plays out for autistic women, I'll just say quickly, is autistic women tend to be people systemizers. So if you're an autistic woman and you're a people systemizer, please get an IO psychology degree because you're perfect for it. Right. We're just naturally, we think of things in systems. We want to break things down to their most, like strip them down to their fundamental truths to understand them. And really that's a way of thinking and a way of processing that should be taught. Like that natural way that we do things. It's like you're saying, shouldn't we just encourage more of this kind of being and thinking? Right. And like you said, it could be partially what you mentioned earlier. Are neurotypicals now concerned because it's a competence difference? Right. Is that something that people are concerned about? Maybe. Right? Maybe. But yeah, so forest versus the trees. Okay, so really quickly, let's go over a couple of the other accommodations. So again, like everybody should have flowcharts and like should know what the steps are and tasks that they're supposed to complete. Like what are the pieces versus just kind of giving somebody a broad and ambiguous large project. That's something that happens a lot to people. They're given like a pretty ambiguous project without a starting point or without like some guidelines. And especially for an autistic person, like we have got to make sure that we're on the same page as our managers, or like we will go and create something totally different from what they might think because of our divergent brain. Like if we don't get boundaries or a clear sense of direction, like we're going to go a lot of places with that assignment, and it might be very different from what a neurotypical would expect. Right. And so that's what happens a lot of times in these situations where there is some distress between an autistic person and a neurotypical manager. It's the autistic person needs these clear boundaries and these clear ways of, okay, what are you really expecting from me and how do I get there? Right. And that's something that just everybody should have. And that would make for much better and more efficient processes and more efficient products in the end if we were more clear. So it's this clarity thing, like people aren't being clear. So, okay, structural supports now, the structure of the position.
Oh, by the way, just to add quickly,
sure, yeah, go ahead.
These points make sense to me. And even beyond that, some very, very notable companies across the world, that's how they do business, whether it's like Toyota or BMW, Germany and Japan, respectively, they have all these processes outlined in very, very clear detail. And, hence that's why, they are essentially the top of the game in the auto industry. So, both Toyota and BMW, they have such a streamlined, efficient process where everybody is very clear of the expectation each part of the way. And this goes from the way you assemble your desk, the way you organize your desk, and the way that the car is essentially built on the assembly line. So, it kind of makes me wonder, are certain aspects of neurotypicality kind of shitting the bed for everybody? Because if I look at to be honest, I look at efficiency and kind of what you're explaining. These really shouldn't be looked at as accommodations. In fact, I think a lot of these should be looked at as the standard. So to say. Having a workflow, having templates. I think we can all point to examples of inefficiency at maybe companies we may have worked at in the past, or individuals, and not having templates, not having workflows, kind of like this comfortable confusion everybody has in the room. And, I don't think that should be looked at as an accommodation. That should probably be a deliverable. That should be the bare requirement. Have workflows, have templates, have a clear idea of each step of the way, because it's good to ask questions. But, could you imagine how much time you'd save if everybody had those type of tools on hand?
Exactly.
So to say.
Exactly. And so you can see now too, Adam, like as we're going through this, how this really can bridge a relationship between neurotypicals and neurodivergent people, right? Because these are things that would just make everybody more successful at their jobs, and more comfortable and more, and like, it's just, here's the thing though, it's like neurotypical people are much better at compartmentalizing than neurodivergent people. Like neurotypicals can leave their job at their job. Right. So I worked with somebody before that like literally wouldn't take his computer home, and like just at 4:30 it was just like, don't even care anymore. And I was like, I can't even conceptualize a life like that. Like I care so much about my job. Like I just was somebody who, like, I took my computer home and I worked a lot and all these things. And I forget what was I trying to say there? It was about what you were saying, but it's this culture. Okay. It's this difference in culture. I want to go back to what you were talking about with Asian culture, because you brought up a really good point there.
Oh, with Toyota. Yeah.
With Toyota. Yeah. And so we see on IQ, on measures of IQ and all these different kinds of measures, the Asians tend to score 1 to 2 standard deviations above Americans on things. And it's the same with Jews. I'm also Jewish, by the way. It's the same with Jews. So Ashkenazi, especially like Ashkenazi Jews, have generally higher IQ, and it's, they also have more autistic people too. A lot of autistic Jews. And so
also, I believe the most Nobel Prize winners as well. Yep. So absolutely. I've come across some of the research that you're talking about. So yeah.
Yes. And so it's this, and like you're saying, it's when we're comparing the cultures, it's like really it's autism as a culture. And we're seeing these cultures that are more efficient, like you're saying about. It's like the autism culture, right? So we can think of autism as almost being a set of cultural practices instead of like deficiencies in a human being, right? It's like we have totally different cultural practices in the way that we speak, the way we communicate. The ways we communicate, the way we speak, the way we interact with the world, the way we experience the world. These are all just differences in our culture and our experience. And so I just wanted to mention that because, I think when you talk about the things in Judaism and the things in Asian culture, it's like these are all cultural practices. And that's why we're seeing that, they're prioritizing clarity, right? Prioritizing process, right? And so we can take away things from that culture and integrate that into our culture. It's just their cultural
to be honest, that's probably not a bad idea. And in fact, growing up, for a lot of my friends who were attending Hebrew school, growing up, the actual, you could say, academic brain power required for those weekends was very, very intense, to say the least. So imagine you're starting that at like 5, 6, 7 years old. I think it makes you very, well suited as far as, kind of adapting that type of lifestyle into, graduate school and, greater, professions from that. And I will say, this is anecdotal, of course, but, for my friends who were attending Hebrew school growing up, it was this open dialogue and deep, intensive questioning was always encouraged because, when I was a kid, when I would go to let's say Sunday school, whether I was getting my communion or something at the time, growing up Catholic, and then my, my friends who were Jewish, they just came back from Hebrew school. It's like, okay, so we both had a crazy weekend, just studying, but, and we'll tell each other about it. But one of the things I definitely picked up from my friends who were going to Hebrew school over the weekend, it was essentially like doing almost the equivalent of college classes on the weekend.
Literally,
when you're a kid. So, especially like learning Hebrew, learning the insides and outs of let's say the Talmud and the Torah. Like it's very,
it's high level.
It's very high level. Yeah. And especially when you're starting as a child doing that.
Yeah.
I can only imagine the benefits to be reaped, later on in life.
Totally. And like that increased vocabulary and that work ethic.
Right.
All of that stuff. I mean, it's so critical. It's so critical. And it's so exciting to see that, I love seeing autism being described more as a culture and as practices because it's helping us to also bridge our differences with our friends and things like that. And it's helping us to understand how to explain ourselves in a way that's non-pathologizing, right? It's helping us to understand that there are just different ways that we live our life that we don't need to compare and say this is better or that's better or this is, there's just people have different social preferences and that's okay. And I think, one of the number one things is that, like one of the criteria for autism is this deficit in communication and this social emotional reciprocity issues and things like that. It's like, yeah, we can disprove that really quickly because, if you just watch two autistic people talk to each other, no issue in communication. No issue in understanding each other, no issue in empathy or perspective taking. So if somebody was really deficit in communication and deficit at reciprocity, would they be able to, that would be applied across every context, wouldn't you say?
Right, yeah.
Right?
For sure,
So I just wanted to mention that and say, it's just, we have social, I love reframing it as social cognition difference, different ways in thinking about socializing, more direct communication, just different ways of being. And so as we start to talk about autism as a culture, I think it helps people who are neurotypical enjoy that about us and kind of help to embrace that. I mean, my friendships have gotten so much better since I've just been more autistic outwardly, being more autistic, saying more of what, not filtering myself so much so that I'm shaping myself to be a different person. It helps me if I can accept that my autism is my culture. It helps me love myself. It helps me explain myself. It helps me support myself. But if I'm thinking of autism as a disordered condition, where does somebody go from there? What's the path?
Right. And I have a question. So growing up, did you attend Hebrew school as well?
Totally. Yep. Tuesdays and Sundays.
And which side? Is it just mom or dad or both sides of the family are Jewish?
My grandma's side is Ashkenazi, and I have two moms. So my dad's out of the picture, but I have two moms, and we're all Jewish. But yeah, it's both of my moms, and I was raised very deeply in Hebrew Jewish culture, and I did my trip to Israel, and I did all that kind of stuff.
So you went to Birthright, and
Yep.
Okay, all right, got it.
I did all the things, and I will say, they're definitely. I mean, Jewish culture is very intense, and it's very scholastically focused, and so you find that I don't know, there's just so many. I feel like there's just so many autistic Jewish people, and I'm just thinking about them. It's I mean, we just, and that's why I'm is it a cultural practice somewhat too?
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question, because if you look at the amount of achievement, whether it's in mathematics, tech, entertainment, I mean, there is a very high, disproportionately high amount of overachievers, from essentially the Jewish community in the United States. So I kind of wonder, growing up, let's say going to Hebrew school and, growing up Jewish, is there more of encouragement as far as this kind of abstract, out of the box, divergent thinking? Because, growing up, because, even growing up where, my neighborhood was mostly Italian and Jewish growing up, It does seem like that, kind of the creativity that's encouraged, whether it was hanging out with my friends and, going out to dinner with your folks and whatnot. You certainly felt it. I don't know if there's a tangible word for it, but there was a certain vibe, maybe.
Oh yeah, I totally can answer this. So Jews are taught to question everything. Throughout time, people have tried to convert Jews to all kinds of different things, right?
Oh yeah, right,
but they've
absolutely.
had to stand in their beliefs, even if they weren't allowed to read their scripts, right? I mean, this was something that happened to us often, time and time again. And so we're taught from a very young age this practice of questioning, and this whole, you do not believe things people tell you. You do not believe things people tell you. You do not believe things.
I like that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, literally. Right. Like my rabbi straight up was always like, well, do you believe in God? Right? It wasn't like, no, it wasn't like you have to do these things and believe these things. It was like, it was always like a critical examination. I think this is what you're speaking to. It's really
my friends in Hebrew school tell me like these things. They challenge their rabbi about different things, and you're like, oh wow, that's pretty bold, I gotta say. Some of the questions that are kind of discussed,
Totally. It's very, very deep. And also, Judaism is like the hardest religion to convert to, because like they don't want people to convert.
Right. Like, it's actually quite the opposite as far as other faiths. Yeah. Right. I've had two friends who converted, and there was a period of time, and by the way, I don't know the specific details or names, but there's essentially a certain time period where you kind of have to continuously be rejected before you kind of start the 3 times.
You have to be rejected.
Okay, 3 times. Okay.
Yes. And I want to revise. It's not that they don't want people to be Jewish. It's that they don't want people just to join something. Right. And so that's something that's very different about Judaism from some other religions that are more like encouraging a lot more people to join.
Like proselytizing and conversion.
Sure.
And things.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. And if you think about some other religions too, like there's a lot of, this is how things are. This is what you need to believe. This is what, and it's that groupthink and that conformity. And like Jews understand that level of groupthink and conformity is dangerous. Very dangerous.
I mean, this is very practical. Everything you're saying makes sense. From Hebrew school and kind of some of the underlying philosophies in Jewish culture. I mean, this is very practical.
It's extremely practical. It's like raise your hand, like disagree, ask questions, and these are also all the practices that make up. I'm just realizing this right now. These are all the practices that make up psychological safety. So people in environments where they're conforming a lot usually don't feel psychologically safe enough to raise their hand and disagree, because they're afraid, I'm going to look different, right? And so people who are raised Jewish and autistic people too, it's like you're already like pretty different. Like you already have like a very rigid thought process and rigid ways of critically examining things. Right. And so you're much more likely to be an innovator and much less likely to be conforming. Right. And so you see in Judaism, you see in Israel has the most startups per capita of any country in the world. Very, very innovative people. Oh yeah.
That's
on my
awesome.
birthright trip.
That makes sense. I have heard of the extremely high amount of startups, but it doesn't surprise me that they're number one.
Yeah,
so,
it's nuts. It's absolutely
sense.
nuts. It's so crazy. And so I would say it goes back to these cultural practices of disagreeing, of not conforming, of what does this mean? What can be done? What can be better? Right. I mean, I think it also comes from a long line of, Jews have been traumatized and oppressed for all of time. And there's a long line of trauma throughout our generations. And so we've, there's distrust in that. And I think, I think what beauty is born out of that is, I know my worth, I know my rights, I know my beliefs, I know my, and like, no, I'm not going to just say something so that everybody likes me. I don't, that's not something that is like a Jewish practice at all. Jews are very eccentric, kind of funky and like silly, like they're just it's just wonderful. Very like true in themselves and things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Especially growing up here, I can definitely see that. I think that's wonderful, to say the very least. So it seems to me this kind of made you better equipped to go into these waters of psychology. Having, I think, the almost, you could say, the childhood academic preparation for a lot of this, and then kind of coming, and if the culture encourages this type of creativity, which we clearly see, like whether it's in science, entertainment, various aspects of tech. It's very good preparation, I have to say.
Absolutely.
Without a doubt.
Oh, I'm so grateful. And I will say at the time, I was so pissed. I had to go to so much extra school. I was
Right.
pissed.
I can
But looking
imagine, especially
back,
when you're a kid.
yeah, but looking back, like I really do feel like I was challenged so much more in that setting than I was in a school setting.
Right.
Absolutely. I feel like I was really much more like rigorously challenged. And so because I was challenged in that way, Judaishly, I don't know, Jewishly, but
Or
also,
judaically, or yeah.
but also like
Sure.
autistically. I think that combination of like me being autistic and raised with this questioning practice,
Right.
it's like, yeah, I'm gonna constantly.
Yeah, Alex, you still there? Did we lose you?
And I,
Oh, never
oh, am I
mind.
still here? Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. It seemed
Okay,
like you
there we
kind
go.
of
I was
cut
gonna
out for a
say,
second. Well, looks like you're back.
sorry about that, but just
Yeah.
just comparing like autistic and Jewish practice, I was saying that I'm just much less likely to conform, and I'm much more likely to say, hey, there's
Yeah.
many different ways of thinking about things, many different perspectives here, and then you don't get stuck in the cycle of, nothing's
Right.
changing in my life, nothing's happening because I'm not thinking differently, right?
Right.
It's that cycle, and I think we can teach people how to do this. I think we can teach
Yeah.
people these practices from a young age, so it's just really common. And then think about how much better workplaces would be and friendships would be if like we could really truly be authentic because we have an authentic identity. I
Yeah.
think if we're not raised to have an authentic identity of like, I can think for myself, I learn how to examine things, I learn how to say
Right.
no or to disagree, and that's good. I think that has to be something that's really instilled in childhood of like, yeah, say like you do not have to conform. Like
Right.
say different things because we get better products that way, we get better solutions that
Right.
way. I mean, it really benefits everyone, truly.
Right. And I have to say this, growing up Catholic and going to Sunday school, I definitely don't remember anybody arguing with the nuns during Sunday school. I definitely don't remember that.
Yeah,
That seldom happened from my memory. But I did hear about my friends going to Hebrew school and arguing with the rabbis. So I kind of always thought that was pretty cool. Like, oh,
yes,
that's
it's so neat.
nice.
It's so neat, right? It's so cool.
Right.
And yeah. And so it's like young autistic people, we already have these brains that are kind of equipped to do it. And we just need the cultural practices to be reinforced around us, right?
Right.
Such that we can float, we can fly, we can be free, we can be ourselves, we can feel limitless. I think it's just funny. It's like the people that are so equipped and so really can be game changers and kind of be these there was some research I read, Adam, about how to create more psychological safety in workplaces, and
Right.
one of the one of the suggestions was to hire people into a workspace that would create that environment naturally. And I thought that was really interesting because I was like,
Yeah.
oh my god, I can't even think of a workplace that I've been in where I didn't change the way people were doing things because I was like, why
Right.
wouldn't you think of this? Or why wouldn't you do that? Or like raise my hand and said, I don't know. Because I didn't, and I think maybe the rabbis reinforced that too. It's okay to disagree with your
That's awesome.
leaders, right? And that's
Yeah.
something that I think it can be harmful in workplaces is
Right.
you're made to feel like this person is the boss, and so they're the end all be all, they know everything, I can't disagree with them, I can't suggest a
Yeah.
different solution. That just hurts everybody in the situation because things don't get better, things don't improve, right? And
Right.
we're not really working together to improve things if we're not able to speak our truth or to
Right.
speak up about a different idea or a different process or anything like that, right? And so
Right.
it's like organizations that really want to be on the cutting edge of this, they would be like, oh my gosh, I need to hire autistic people because as I bring them in to be part of these teams, we're going to naturally influence the team to be more authentic. And
Right.
I've literally seen this happen in my work. Like really people become more authentic and feel like they can be human at work when somebody else is doing it. I mean, it's that
Right.
mirroring and that social modeling is so important. It just
Right.
takes bringing one person into an environment that shows everybody, yeah, there's a different way to be here. And then
Right.
you can see massive change happen just from that, right? It's
Right.
incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
by the way, just to kind of throw a little bit of my authenticity here, I didn't find out I had ADHD until much later in life, but I will say I kind of always had a feeling growing up. I've always had my own processes
Yeah.
that were much different than many of my other classmates. So the intense, I guess you could say, bursts of energy, I've had that. So being able to kind of deeply immerse yourself into kind of mastering or studying something. but then also the kind of the accommodating, I guess you could say the preceding burnout from that too,
Yes.
is very,
Good
very,
point.
very, is a very real thing. So for me, growing up had always been a process of creating systems,
Yeah.
you know, for myself. So kind of once I had a system,
Mhm.
and mind you, this was like, you know, early to mid 90s. So there wasn't a whole lot of maybe understanding in a lot of this stuff. But, you know, once I think I was able to kind of feel good in my own skin about it,
Yeah.
it allowed me to overperform and hyperperform, you know,
Yeah.
against kind of, you know, some of my peers. But, you know, don't get me wrong, it definitely felt like a certain sense of otherness, you know, to say the very least. So, you know, there'd be times where, you know, I could just, you know, pick up something immediately and, you know, piss off a teacher and, you know, maybe, you know, cause resentment from some of my classmates. But then there's been times I would just like really struggle because it's like, okay, I have to do it this way. This is driving me nuts, you know,
Yeah.
type of thing. So, so, you know, learning to kind of, you know, navigate those waters, one of the things I had to pick up on was how to regulate energy, because my original instinct was to go in sixth gear on everything I did, so to say.
Absolutely.
So
Yep.
even
I
though,
feel
let's
you
say
there
I
too.
could do those things, but then later it almost feels catatonic, just the amount of, you know, recuperation you need afterwards. So
Right.
that was one of the first things, you know, I kind of you know, had to learn. So, you know, some of the things you are mentioning, I could definitely, you know, relate, you know, and understand. And, you know, your example about the trees, you know, having a bird's eye view of the forest is great, but I am one of those people. I need to know
Yeah.
what every tree looks like and
Yeah.
what
Like, I don't want to
animal
take
is
your
on
word
every
for what the
tree.
forest is, right?
Huh?
You're like, I
Yeah.
don't want to take your word for what the larger forest area
No,
is.
because
I want to
I'll
look
be
at
honest, it
before.
feels I get a sense of unease from it.
Yes.
To be very honest.
Right?
So
Yeah.
if I
Yes.
don't know what the rest of the forest looks
Too
like,
ambiguous.
I kind of obsess over it. I'm like, okay, well, what does the rest of this actually look like? And if I
Yeah.
don't know what the rest of it looks like, then it's just going to kind of cause me to I don't know. It's going to just cause more overall, you know, frustration, so to say. So, yeah, I could certainly relate to some of the things, you know, you were speaking, and that probably is the source of a good chunk of my questions,
Totally.
you know, as well about this. So, yeah, I mean, these things, these topics, and these issues you pointed out, they're, you know, very, very helpful, and I think encouraging, you know, some of these neurodivergent, you know, systems of thinking
Totally.
should be encouraged, you know, a lot more, to, you know, to say the very least. So
Yes.
yeah.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah, but
And
that's a little, but yeah, that's a
yeah.
little page from, you know, from my book anyway. But I would say, if I was to compare it, if I don't manage the energy, because it kind of feels like this, it kind of always feels like having a surplus of energy, and
Yeah.
you need some way to direct some of that energy, so to
Totally.
say. So
Totally.
for me, it's like, if I don't have an aim or a direction to kind of aim, or, you know, kind
Yes.
of direct that energy towards to,
Right.
then that causes kind of a little bit more frustration. So having to know what every tree
Totally.
looks like, that would be an example of like, okay, I need to direct this energy, this curiosity, you know, towards this.
Right.
You know, some of the other things I do, like, you know, I constantly have to, let's say, exercise.
Yes.
Because that is actually kind of what kind of, you know,
That's
cools
a
off
great
the engine.
emotional energy regulator. Yeah. Exercise
Yeah,
is
cools
so
off.
important.
It kind of cools the engine, because otherwise I just feel like I have a very hot engine all the time.
Oh,
So
totally.
so for
Totally.
me,
And it's one of the only
energy.
ways you probably can turn your brain off too, right? Is when you're
Right,
exercising.
right. So, you know,
Yeah.
for me, energy regulation is kind of one of the things I learned, as far as,
Yeah.
okay, how do I make this more efficient? Because otherwise, it's just kind of, if the engine's too hot, and it's gonna,
Yeah.
you know, it's gonna end up kind of stalling.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so that was, you know, one of the things, you know, growing up, and even till now, like, it kind of just took constant self-knowledge and practice, you know, around that. But it also became an asset, and
Yes.
you know, over time, and that's how I looked at it, you know.
Yes.
So, you know, I think whether
Beautiful.
it's autism or ADHD, I'll say this: if you know how to kind of correct,
Mhm.
then you have an asset, if not an advantage. I would say
Yeah.
you really do. And by the way, not even to talk about myself, but many other colleagues and friends of mine who
Yeah.
were, autistic or, somewhere traditionally on the spectrum. These were the individuals who were like at the top of my class, essentially booking booking all the courses. These are, individuals who created really great companies and, startups and, did something, incredible from that. So, I mean, listen, if being let's say neurodivergent is, my destiny, I'll take it any day of the week.
Oh my
Absolutely.
gosh, yes. And I love to hear you say it with pride, because that's really
Absolutely.
what we're working to do here. Is we want
Yeah.
neurodivergent people to delight in their differences, encourage their differences,
Right.
create and find spaces. So I talk a lot about like neurodivergent life design,
Right.
neurodivergent self-care. So you just talked about exercise. That's like a big neurodivergent self-care
Like I
practice,
said, it's
right?
one of the ways to efficiently, like
Yeah.
time-wise and energy-wise,
Yeah.
to kind of recycle that energy. So,
Yeah.
I could say, kind of my compass or my scope works a little bit better, because otherwise
Yeah.
I'm going to want to kind of attack and do everything at once,
Yes.
so to say.
Yes.
That would be the inclination. Let's say if I go like long periods of time and there's not exercising, or if I feel kind of too stagnant and not
Right.
productive enough, so to say.
Yeah. No, totally.
Yeah.
And there's so many different practices for self-care and for managing those emotions and things. And like you said, or I think you mentioned this when you were talking about ADHD, but what happens a lot to ADHDers and autistic people at work, especially when we're like, we have all this energy, we have this really big project, and we have to know like where to put that energy, like where to put it best. And like you said,
Right.
managing, because we can spin our wheels so much trying to think of all the different ways to solve something, all the different
Right.
ways to attack this project, right? And so we find that in those cases, like that's where ask clarification questions, like don't spin
Right.
your wheels. And so, because these are some self-care practices where, many neurodivergent people would just take the vague instruction and then spin, and get really upset.
Yeah,
and then
I'm
really
not
hard to
cool with that at all. Like, because you know what it is.
Yeah.
And by the way, I know I'm only speaking for myself.
Yeah.
I feel restless if there isn't clarity on something.
Yes.
But
Right.
but
and you'll just try to
I
create that clarity for yourself in whatever way you can.
right, and
Yeah.
I will ask questions, but I will also see a lot of people just okay with that, and I think people would kind of rather stay the course and maybe screw things up, so to say, rather than just kind of asking questions.
Right.
Questions. I mean, life is a little too short to kind of feel embarrassed over asking
It is.
questions. And to be honest, my experience is this: if you're thinking it, probably everybody else is thinking it too.
That's so true. That's so true. And that's one of those. So
yeah,
it's so
it
funny.
seriously is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seriously is. It's so funny. I studied took a social psychology class, and you learn about all these. It was so funny being an autistic taking social psychology, because I was just like, oh, this is why I'm like, what? Like, why are
Right.
people doing this stuff? Because there's the diffusion of responsibility and things. So that's why people don't, like, if you text in a group text, like, people won't respond, like no one will respond because somebody thinks somebody else will do it, right? So there's that sort of
Right.
thing where you just shift responsibility onto other people, and the same
Yeah,
thing
and
where
see, that's
everybody's
another thing I'm
confused.
restless with as well. So
Yes,
like
yes.
if I'm very uncomfortable waiting on other people to do things. So if I can do it, then I'm doing it, and I'm doing it right now.
Just do it.
Because
Yeah, right.
it helps me actually relax more later. Because otherwise I may end up kind of ruminating over it, so to say.
Exactly.
And yeah, like I said, maybe it's the direction of energy, so to say. But that is kind of the best
Yeah.
way I can conceptualize,
No, that's
a lot of that,
beautifully put.
a lot of that too. And I've encountered this at times, whether this was in school or professionally, where having to do things by the same process, and if it takes me longer, that frustrates me. So if I can do something and it's my way and it's faster,
Yes,
and
beautiful.
I have all of this free time, there was a lot of situations where like, okay, do I have to hide this so I don't hurt other people's feelings or make people insecure? And I didn't, but it's like, okay, I did this already. I did it my way.
Right.
I'm gonna go relax now.
Yeah.
So for me, the need to kind of create efficiency in processes are very,
Yes.
very important for me. So if
Yes.
I'm doing something and it's very time inefficient, it pisses me off. I'm not even kidding. It pisses me off.
Yes,
Like
very
I'm like,
frustrating.
why am I wasting my time right now? Like I have this energy, I'm not
Yeah.
directing it properly.
Right.
What the fuck? Seriously. Like
Yes.
yeah, I'm not kidding. Like that's
Yeah.
literally what's going
It's
through my
absolutely
head.
frustrating. Yeah, absolutely.
And then,
absolutely.
and then if I see others like, oh, okay, just kind of, go along to do what you're told. I'm like, No, this is a waste of time right now.
Right, exactly.
Why do we go to step 2 and 3? Like, let's keep going.
That's the beauty of the neurodivergent brain is I think, a lot of us walk in, I mean, this is what happens. We walk into jobs and we completely redesign our roles. This happens all the time. I work with people who are neurodivergent, and like we're coming in and we are building a more efficient way of doing that job. We're building a new process for that job, or maybe we're building a process when there wasn't one, like we talked about, right? Like there's no flow chart or whatever. Like, what am I supposed to do? And so our systemizing brains just put us at such an advantage in these positions, and that should be encouraged. And I think, like you're saying, if there's a different way of doing something, why not? And then people are like, just do it. And it's like, no, like let us innovate on the process. And that's how you get loyalty and commitment from employees too. They feel like they have a stake in something, right? They feel like they're contributing something important. Why not encourage employees to, like, I think in a perfect world, employees would have 20 to 30% control over like what they're doing, like of their job, at least 20 to 30% to do something even maybe entirely different than their job, to kind of cross train. Or I think, for example, like more companies are starting neurodiversity ERGs, which is incredible. Every company should have one. I consult on those, by the way, just a plug.
That's great.
But every company should have these neurodiversity ERGs and should be encouraging these neurodivergent people to create better systems and processes where they're working. Like, why not? Right. So yeah, I think it all comes back to autonomy and control, right? It's like to be autonomous and to feel in control is important. And I think, like, for our brains, we've got to create those systems and those processes to feel in control of our brains, or we're going to freaking not be okay, right? Like, we definitely, that's why we systemize things. It's for predictability and it's for comfort, And
by the way, I'll tell you this, and I don't know if this is something that's ever come across your head, but I've been at times in many roles because, let's say I've created my own more efficient process to do things. I'm kind of in this position where I'm like asking myself, okay, why is this person my supervisor? So it kind of causes a little bit of like, I don't know if it's just competition on my part, but that's kind of how I end up feeling, a lot of times. And by the way, it's not everybody, but I've had times, and I think like many people, where you've been able to do a job and master it, but you're also subject to the inefficient processes around you. So that kind of, I think for both neurotypical and neurodivergent, I think everybody probably has some sort of familiarity, with that. So let's say if you're a very efficient neurotypical thinker, I am quite sure you've probably encountered it. And I think if you're a talented neurodivergent thinker, I think you've encountered that as well. Maybe almost in equal shares, I would say.
Absolutely. So it's really exciting to know too that like we have such assets in our employees. Like, why don't we trust them with more of the decision making and more of the why don't we give them more autonomy? Because if you think about it, like that's what creates growth, and that's what makes people also want to try harder and want to work harder, is when they feel like, okay, there's somewhere to go from here, but also like I'm in control, I'm in the driver's seat. Right. I think that's what's going to be the future of work and the future of organizations, is where it's not leaders and followers, it's collaborators. Like so the way I started my company, like I'm not the CEO, like I don't even like that term. Like I founded it, but I'm a consultant, and I work with other neurodivergent consultants, and I see everybody as equal to me. And I, even like, it's so important to me that everybody feels valued completely equally. And there's a way to do that in leadership. And that's so important, to partner. And this is why I call it partnering with your employees, collaborating with your employees, because really in the traditional sense, managers are often supposed to be getting the resources for you and getting the training for you. They're supposed to be your guide and your resource person, right? And so wouldn't their job also be to ensure your work is designed properly around you? I mean, that's the person that should be responsible for this. And so when we're talking about accommodations, it's, we're talking about it being a split responsibility. It's like the employee has to be there, and the employee has to know all of their needs and how that environment needs to be designed. A lot of these are self-accommodations, but the employer, like, it's your job just to hear, to listen, and then to provide that environment. Like, that's what management is for. And so it just seems like it's one of those things. I think autistic people, we come up with these ideas and we're like, shouldn't everything just be done this way? And then people are like, oh, just nobody ever thought of it, and nobody conceptualized it like that, right?
Yeah, and by the way, like on the flip side, when I've been in other, management roles, and I've had team members who've created, better processes for things, I tend to be the one most open to it. So, for me, I encourage that. And I'm also the type of person, listen, if this is an 8-hour day, so to say, but you got this done in 2 hours, then we're done. Because my feeling is this, I want the best of you on Monday and Tuesday. I don't want you to be burned out or doing busy work where otherwise you could just kind of be recharging your batteries. And, and for me too, I'll tell you this, I don't mind being wrong. In fact, if I'm wrong, I want to know. But if I am right, then accept the process, because if this is results oriented, then let's be efficient with everything we're doing.
Beautifully put. And also, I'd like to add something like 70% of Americans are clinically burned out nearly. So it's really bad.
Yeah.
It's really bad right now. And so right now, especially, organizations have got to pay attention to their employees. Like, if they are burned out, like, they need a rest. And here's the thing, like,
absolutely,
like you're saying, why am I being punished for just being able to complete projects like 10 times more efficiently? Like, I don't understand that. And that's how I feel too. And that's how, I think that's why a lot of autistics find comfort in academia, because in academia, like, you have a due date for something, but they're not going to tell you to sit here all these minutes and while I watch you while you do it.
Right.
And so it's like, we can kind of borrow from that practice a little bit in terms of students get their projects done. They're fantastic. They're great, whatever. But like, some of them took a long time. Some of them didn't take a long time, but you can't tell when the end product is great. And so why are we measuring, like, it's micromanagement essentially?
Right.
It's micromanagement because people do deserve rest, and you're right, like, we're not going to get the best out of people if they aren't rested, and if they aren't
that should be very important. And when I would manage others, that is how I frame it. Like, listen, I want the best of you. So listen, we're done with it now. We're only 2 hours in the day. Go home. Enjoy the weekend, with your girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, husband, because listen, if your personal life is better, it's going to make your work life better too. So, these little things I think are important. And, I butt heads with other managers too. And it's like, what? We're just gonna have everybody sit around here for 6 hours pretending to do work? Listen, nobody's a dummy. If it is if we're all done, then the rest of the day is just optics. Enough with the window dressing here. Enjoy, go relax, go recharge. That's your relaxation routines are just as important. And I would say to people, if you're relaxing, then you just relax. Don't be doing this for like 8 hours, just looking at stuff. Turn it off. Go outside, go out, do something where you're interacting, because I think a lot of times when you tell people to relax, relaxation means, okay, more of the computer. But I don't know the science behind this, but I would imagine your brain probably still feels like you're working. In many ways. I don't know if it's the blue light or just the patterns. Yeah.
Burning our eyes with screens. And it's this, like, you're right, it's this, we really need to take the opportunity to reconnect with nature. We do. Go outside, be outside, and encouraging that, like, I loved when my professors would, like, hold class outside. I swear I was I loved that. I felt so rejuvenated and energized. And, it's like, we need to have some of that novelty sometimes. And so it's like, why not encourage employees to just go work from home, go work on a patio, because sometimes when we're in these different places, we can have these different ideas and we can have this reinvigorated feeling of wanting to work too. It's just, making people come and sit in a cubicle 10 hours a day just sounds like jail.
Well, it
feels like jail.
And it's also, in many ways, not a very, efficient way to organize the day or organize roles and duties, especially if you have a cubicle where, essentially you have, 3 walls around you, and then you get out of your office chair and, mosey your way to the break room or whatnot. I think that's why a lot more companies are getting rid of cubicles. They are kind of making it more of an open space kind of model, probably to, maybe increase workers' morale, reduce anxiety, and the human body has to move around. And, my feeling is this: I think Homo sapiens have existed for about 40,000 years. Listen, and until about 50 or 60 years ago, everybody was standing up and moving around
all the time.
You can't really think that the cubicle life is something so, easily adaptable, where this should be the norm. Oh my God, like, all the physical problems that even come about from sitting all day, higher blood pressure, sciatica, back problems, all different types of posture problems. And if you, whether it's whether it's anybody's ancestors, you know, we're kind of the total of our predecessors, so to say. You know, they were all up and about doing things. Every single one of them, from whatever from whatever continent your ancestors come from. Everybody was active.
Absolutely.
So this whole cubicle life, or this cubicle farm system, it's not working, and you're seeing, especially now in 2022, culture is adapting away from that, and I think rightfully should be.
Rightfully so. I think it's about time, and it's really exciting to see employees. I love when the grassrootsness of things. I love grassroots things, and I just love it, because you see people now just banding together and maybe even not banding together, but at least having all the same ideas about, like, I'm not doing this anymore.
Right.
Like, people are at the end of their rope, and I think COVID, I mean, as stressful and as so horrible that it's been such an eye-opener for people in terms of, there is such a different life I could be living. I mean, there's been people that have been living in, autopilot for 20, 30 years, they've just been going to work, doing this, never having time for themselves, never, always putting off, rest or self-care another week. And I think, there's only so much mentally that we have space for. And I think the trauma we've all experienced collectively from COVID and from things just massively changing overnight. I mean, we're feeling the effects of that, and we're realizing life is important. I am important. My body's important. My soul is important. My mind is important. Like, people are realizing their personal worth through this. People are realizing their personal power through this. And it's really exciting to see. It's really exciting to see, like, okay, how are companies going to respond now? Because they've got to get creative, right? They've got to get creative. And that's when, sort of at the beginning, what I mentioned was they have to treat their employees as clients. You can't just treat your clients as clients. Like, every single employee you hire is a representation of your culture.
Right.
Seriously. Like, that person is a representation of your culture, right? And of your company. That is a client. Like, that is a client that you need to support, that you need to make sure is understanding of their role, and that you need to help, and that you need to inspire. Like, there's all of these things, right? And I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to change, and it's going to be an adapt or die situation, right? That's what we're going to see.
Right. And I have a question. So how did your journey begin heading towards psychology? Like, how did you know, or when did you know you were autistic? You did and thought and processed things, differently, and kind of what problems you encountered and what successes you were able to, realize from that too.
Totally. So I think, a lot of people that go into psychology have experience with mental health in some certain way in their life, is what I'm learning and what I understand about people that choose psychology. And so I grew up with, like I mentioned, I had some really severe trauma early on in life for about 10 years continuously. So that was really hard. And I will say, people who are, a lot of my clientele are autistic and CPTSD, and it is just a really bad 1-2 punch, because CPTSD, what happens when people are so traumatized like that is they're now distrusting of other people, and they feel alone in the world, and they feel like they can only rely on themselves, that sort of thing. So I went through all that trauma, and at home too, I have my 2 moms, and I have my 2 brothers. And each of us, my parent experienced mental health struggles and was misdiagnosed as bipolar and was over medicated. So that's kind of it's really weird.
And I've heard of that happen before too. A lot of people who are otherwise maybe autistic or somewhere on the spectrum, they're diagnosed as being bipolar or something pretty much unrelated to that.
Totally.
Entirely.
You're right. So, it's often OCD, it's bipolar, it's borderline, all of those things. And so you'll notice that the difference between autism and all those conditions is that autism does not have a medication treatment. And so if you think about big pharma and things like that, like, people are really incentivized to diagnose these conditions that are medicated, right? Can fix this, can charge for this, and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so, so my mom was misdiagnosed really young, and it was like, we talked earlier about, like, the 90s just being, like, quite a weird time. Like, it definitely was a transitional state. But my mom was really over medicated, and it was, just seeing her go through that, and just, like, like seeing her not really understand all these things about herself and me not understanding these things. And
Right.
so that was something that I carried with me and that I thought about a lot and held with me. And again, like siblings had some mental health stuff too.
Sure.
And so what was really interesting is I felt like there's a great book called The Drama of the Gifted Child that everybody should read. And they talk a lot about how children that like seem really gifted when they're young, sometimes it's because they grew up way too fast and because they kind of stepped into an adult role at a young age.
Yeah.
And so I'll tell you, we had a family therapist, but I swear I was like the conversation facilitator in the family therapy sessions. And like, I just always had this unique knack for, and that's why I didn't think I was autistic for so long, because it like, yeah, I could systemize people, but it doesn't mean that I had inherent understanding of people. It was that I had to extremely like, and very specifically and like intensely observe people and think about it, right? It wasn't like a natural process for me.
Right.
And so I was so naturally like systemizing people because it was the only way I could figure out how to be. And so you'll see with autism, there's a couple of ways it can manifest. There's a lot of us that over socialize because we're testing a lot. It's like we're testing and seeing what works.
Right.
And it's funny because autism, a lot of the stereotypes are that we don't socialize or we don't talk. And there are autistics that are nonverbal. There are differing levels of support needs and differing levels of sensory stuff. A lot of times, you know, that's related to that. But yeah, so I was always kind of facilitating the family stuff. And like I was my friends' advice givers and their relationship. I was just kind of like the people person somehow.
So you're kind of everybody's rock, it seemed.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And so my mom was like, my mom's a business. I have two moms. My other mom is like tech business, like extraordinaire. And she, you know, I kind of grew up with this. There's a whole different skill set I have because I was raised by like a tech executive. Like that's a very different kind of childhood.
Right. I can imagine.
Yeah, but I was sort of raised to like go into business. I was thinking I would go into business school and I would do business things because my mom did business things. And I remember I picked psychology and so many people were like, that's a dumb choice. They were like, that's a bad choice because you can't make much money or there's not many opportunities and you're going to have to go to grad school. And I was like, grad school sounds great. I don't care. I was like, what do you mean? Sure. So I went to school for psychology and I fell in love with it. It was a very intuitive science for me because that's what I thought was so weird about it. I was like, I already kind of think this way. And it's because I had kind of already systemized people, and psychology is like literally the practice of systemizing people. Yeah. So it was like such a perfect avenue for me. And you'll see a lot of autistic people do go into these human studies type fields because we just don't know what the fuck's going on. So you'll see us in biology and in physics and again, like psychology. There's a lot of autistics in psychology because we're like, what's going on here? Let's talk about it. Let's research it. Right. So I chose psychology, and the professor I just happened to just absolutely love so much. She's still my mentor right now, Dr. Jillian Frucci. She's who I assisted her. I was her RA on the Africa project that we worked on together.
Oh, very nice.
And it was all around autism, and her work is all around early developmental research around autism. Yeah. And so I just think it's so funky. Like I just really was learning about autism, being autistic, and this is my story, is like I didn't know I was autistic even though I was writing about it. Like, absolutely not. And the reason why is because of what we talked about at the beginning, Adam. It's that people dehumanize autism, and it's very hard to find the humanness in it in any of the literature. And so, like, being a human, reading these things, it was really, like, it still felt like to me just a collection of behaviors that confused me. I mean, I remember always being very confused about this topic that I was writing about, too, because I was like, well, what does it feel like? And when you don't talk about the experiences and the like how people are feeling and what's caused it, like there's reasons why behaviors happen. Why aren't we talking about the reasons why behaviors happen? Right.
Yeah.
So anywho, I studied autism, and I heard about the field of IO, and I was really excited about it because I didn't want to go into clinicals because I'm very empathic, and I take on people's like stories and feelings as my own.
Will that like ride with you throughout the weekend and the week and
literally like and
like okay.
You know, like we were talking about, neurotypicals can compartmentalize things. I cannot compartmentalize things at all. Like everything I experience lives with me. I'm thinking it all the time. It's just all within me. I can't separate myself into different people. Like I am me and I'm a lot.
Yeah.
And so with clinical, I knew that, you know, I'm going to be so sad if, you know, something really bad happens too. I was like, I'm scared about that. And I was just concerned about how I would handle that sort of work. And so I chose IO because I was like, holy moly, I can combine business, which I kind of already understand. I've listened to all of my mom's conference calls since I was 7. Like in the car, my mom would have all of her conference calls and she would teach me about all the things she was doing at work and what they were talking about and all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, business seems like something that's interesting to me. And it seems like it would be great to apply psychology in the business space, right? It seems like it would be really interesting. And so I still like, you know, I went in and started my master's in IO psychology. And then I went to a PSYOP conference. It's called PSYOP, the Society for IO Psychology. And I found a panel actually there. It was called Autism at Work. And I went to this panel, and that's where I met my really good friend, Anthony Pacilio. He was working at JP Morgan Chase at the time. He's now at Computer Aid Inc. But so I saw him, and I saw a representative from Microsoft, I believe SAP. And these leaders, these industry leaders, were talking about their Autism at Work programs and how like the results they were seeing. And so at JP Morgan Chase, they had some crazy freaking stats, Adam. It was like autistic employees are 90% more productive after just 3 months than a neurotypical employee. So we saw 90% productivity increase, learning their role 2 times faster than neurotypicals. And then the third thing was turning over at 5%. Only 5% turnover after 5 years. That's nuts. And so,
by the way, I'm sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. By the way, go ahead.
I wanted to add, so I have an article here of essentially, you know, 20 famous people, I guess you could say, currently and throughout history, who are or have known to be autistic. So this is a very, very compelling list, to say the least. And I think we can all learn something from this. So Sir Isaac Newton. And by the way, I'll post the link later, but Sir Isaac Newton, Jerry Seinfeld, Satoshi Tajiri, the creator of Pokemon, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Bill Gates, Emily Dickinson, famous poet and writer, Charles Darwin, Tim Burton. I love his movies.
Love Tim Burton.
Batman, Nightmare Before Christmas, all those things when I was a kid. Anthony Hopkins. Dan Aykroyd and Albert Einstein. So, I'll post the link later, you know, for this. But like I said, if these are people who are kind of the champions of what they do, perhaps neurodivergent thinking should be better encouraged, to say the least. I recall hearing about Albert Einstein that I think throughout school.
I think he's Jewish too, right?
He is Jewish, actually. Yeah. He came from Germany. He actually was not speaking until anywhere between 5 to 7 years old. So really like the first part of his childhood, he was not speaking. So a lot of times in school, his teachers dismissed him as being, you know, very slow or very deficient or whatever terminology they used back then. And now you look in the context of things of all he accomplished.
Oh my God.
So I kind of wonder, you know, at times, is the stigma attached? Because are people afraid to look in the mirror, which I think is very much the case with a lot of people, or B, it's just easier. You don't have to think too much. Or is it, you know, something beyond that? Maybe, I
think there's a C. I think the C is conformity.
Is there some sort of conformity or maybe even resentment towards, you know, something that others see in these kind of people? So there is kind of the need, human need, maybe to push the competition down, if you see it.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's absolutely part of it. And I just want to add too, Elon Musk is autistic too.
Right. I heard about that too.
Elon Musk, similarly to Albert Einstein, I remember reading an article about Elon Musk, and he said he didn't talk until much later either, but he said the reason he didn't talk is he didn't think people were saying things that were very interesting. Thought that was absolutely hilarious.
That's hilarious.
He just didn't want to.
He's probably right. He's probably right. You know?
I don't want to do it.
Right. Screw that.
He's like, no one's really that fascinating. So interesting.
Yeah, but you know, you watch his interviews. He says very impactful, profound things.
He does.
And you can tell he's very
so
thoughtful.
Much processing going on.
Right, before he says something.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know,
He's
I've seen many, I guess you could say, whether they were very informative or even inspirational talks or interviews by him, he deeply contemplates what he says, not from like what people are going to think about me, but I really do feel when he says something, he tries to make it as accurate and as kind of surgical as possible. So like I've watched Elon Musk. I never thought anything he said was unnecessary or just kind of verbose for the sake of being verbose. I get the impression from him, he says what he thinks is going to be spot on for either the question or issue he's talking. Because I feel like I watch him and he thinks before he says something. I can appreciate that.
He does.
You know, and then he says it and I'm like, wow.
And it's like, so you're right, it's profound. And here's another accommodation people can write down here. Increased processing time. So there's a lot of companies where you'll be pushed to give an answer on the spot or something, right? Like the manager is like, tell me now what you're gonna do or do this. And it's like, no, I mean, there's value in, like, shouldn't we value a really well thought out answer and a really contemplative answer versus what's the quickest and fastest thing I can say to impress this person right now, right? So that's another thing that we need to be thinking about is giving people time to process. And like, really, that's how you can make sure people are on the same page too, is like, a lot of what we talk about too with autistic people is like, write down what you want instead of just saying it once broadly. Like, write it down. Write it down, send me an email of the task, and then let's discuss it. But when things are written down, like, that's the Bible now, right? It's like that is the text. That is the text we can refer to, and we can make sure we're on the same page. And I just think, you know, people think that when people are slow to respond that they're dumb, and it's not true. There are a lot of people that are slow to respond because there's gears turning and turning and turning. There's a lot happening up here, and it's working to search all of the ways that this can be answered. And then because that's like what's happening in the divergent brain. And that's why sometimes we speak slower, we speak in different cadences, or we need a second, you know? And so that's a way that it's actually an accommodation some people need because people can think that that means we're dumb.
Yeah, and by the way, don't get me wrong. I think, you know, having an answer on the spot is good. Let's say in some sort of urgency or exigency or emergency. But like, you know, otherwise, I think 80% or 90% of times, like, well, do you want the witty bullshit answer or do you want the good answer? You know, like that's, you know, I tell people that, like, which one do you want? I can give you a very nice sounding quip right now if that's what makes you feel better. But if you want the good answer, I think, you know, planning and preparation is always necessary.
And that's a beautiful way, like, people can phrase it. So a lot of how we're going to get these accommodations is like, we need to accommodate ourselves. And so in the conversation, like, you can literally say, like, this is my first feeling is this, and you can say something, and then you can say, but I'd like some more time to get back to you with a more complete answer. So it's also kind of creating, and this is a lot of what I'm doing for neurodivergence and through my TikTok, right, is I make videos of feelings or experiences.
Talk about your TikTok. You have an exceptionally large following. 300K plus. Like, what's the current number?
It's 351 right now. 350.
Wow. Awesome.
Yes. Thank you. And it just grew 50K over in like a month because I just started discussing CPTSD on there. Wow. And that video is like that. I mean, it's a 3-minute video, which is, it's hard to get viral videos on TikTok that are really long, but it's long and it has like 500,000 views or 600,000 now or something. It's like, it's climbing all the time. But I mean, it's just really exciting, this access to information we have now. And like, I wouldn't have known I was autistic if TikTok didn't exist, truly.
Wow.
It's through stories of people who experience conditions that we learn about conditions.
Right.
That's how it works. I mean, stories, sharing of experience, sharing of barriers and successes and all of these things. Like, a lot of us, we hear someone else's story and then finally, like, we have context for our story. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful thing. And so I really, you know, a lot of my work is helping us to figure out what are these scripts that we can say to explain ourselves in a way that other people can understand, right? Because that's what's going to build the empathy between us and neurotypicals.
Right. And I have a question about that. So how were you able to grow your following to that large of a number, 351K? And by the way, do you think does it have anything to do with the fact that you're comfortable to talk about this? Because I would imagine even in 2022, it's not an easy subject matter for people to just reveal
No.
you know, to the world, either professionally or in their personal lives.
Absolutely.
You know?
It's still so misunderstood. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I felt like I had, I honestly, I don't know. It's so crazy. TikTok has like created a bridge between me and a community, and me and a new
That's
community
great.
within myself, and new love
Yeah.
within myself, because the TikTok felt like the only place I could be myself.
Right.
It was the only place where I felt like I kind of talk about it as like I was just kind of screaming into the void, like, is anyone else doing this? Like, are you doing
Right.
this? But how I grew my following is I started the TikTok to discuss specifically autism in the work context.
Yeah.
But then that, as I was doing my own work and research more into adult autism, because I was learning about, in Zambia and in
Right.
my undergrad, it was all childhood experiences. And a lot of people characterize autism by childhood examples, because autism is supposed to be diagnosed. It's a developmental condition, right? So it's a neurodevelopmental condition. And so it's supposed to be diagnosed very young. Like, you're supposed to diagnose it between, doctors are taught to diagnose it between like 2 and 6-ish is when you start to see more traditional signs. And so the reason why we don't have a lot of adult resources is practitioners aren't really given adult resources. I'm not even kidding.
Right.
I mean, a lot of the autism assessments adults are going through are the child versions of assessments, because
Right.
there's not really standardized ways of assessing adults. And there's more coming out now, and there's some really innovative practices like embrace-autism.com. Dr. Natalie's practice is fantastic. It's how I got diagnosed.
Wow.
Yeah, it's so misunderstood. And I started to learn about women who had been late diagnosed. So there was an article I found, and it was like the experiences of 30 autistic women diagnosed late in life. And I made a video about it, and it got like 250,000 views, like pretty fast. And I was like, what the hell? I was like, this is a topic of interest. And so there were a couple of people, there are other autistic TikTokers, but there's not a lot of autistic, like, IO psychologists or educators, or, you know what I'm saying? There's not a lot of that angle. But also, I think what was really attractive about my TikTok is people were like literally on a journey with me. Right. Because after I started looking more into the female presentation, I was like, oh, damn. Like, I started reading women talk about it, and I was like,
yeah,
that's how I feel. And at the time I was working at a neurodiversity consultancy as well. And my boss was like, you're autistic. And I was like, I think you're right. And so this just comes back to, like, with mental health conditions, how would we know we experience it without a human and a relatable story? Right. It's through these stories that a lot of people figure out, like, also with trauma and abuse, it's like through other people's stories that you figure out, oh, that was abuse. I didn't know that was abuse. Right. It's just another example. You need to hear these accounts. Right. And so these case studies. And so I started to, people were asking me as I was talking about autism in women, and I was regurgitating some of the research and trying to make it more relatable for people to, like, read research and stuff like that. And someone said, can you post a test for it? And I was like, oh, interesting. And I was like, wow, okay. And so I actually, like, started videoing a test, and I was going through it, and then I clicked submit, and it said, like, you're autistic. And I was like,
oh, wow.
And that was really the confirmation. And I literally have a video of that. Like, I have a video of it. And so people started to follow me so early on in my journey. And you can tell throughout my TikTok, like, the complexity and the understanding of autism just iterates itself over time. You can see, if you go watch my earliest videos, I'm keeping things much more general. But it's just, I think the reason why the following is so big, and why every video has engagement, is these are autistic people, right? And autistic people find a subject of interest, and they frickin', like, we're specialists, right? And so it's like, I would get a new follower, and then that one follower would like every video, right? Yeah. Every single video. And so I'm not, like other TikTokers where maybe they're having one video go viral, not the other ones. Every single video I had was doing well, because it was building a universe of understanding around this experience. And also for people who are undiagnosed. And also I have a big following of people who are diagnosed and who finally feel like I'm giving them verbiage for it, because they didn't have the verbiage for it. Right. And so, it's just, I cover, I think the reason why the following is so big is I'm a very innovative content creator. So I try to innovate every time I make a new video. I think it's just kind of also like it's like there's advantages to a neurodivergent brain, and there's the whole, I can't do anything twice because I don't want to repeat myself thing. Right. So,
right.
you know, so you're just like constantly moving forward and trying to overly, you're like, I can make it more complex and more complex and more complex,
Yeah.
right? That thing. But yeah, I think I'm starting to distinguish between autism and, you know, my other video that went extremely viral more recently is autism versus narcissism. A lot of autistic people think that they're narcissists for a long time before they find out they're autistic. Or
Can you explain that? Autism
yeah,
versus narcissism, because
totally.
narcissism is a theme that I see more and more on social media when it comes
Yeah.
to, you know, relationships, you know, with a significant other, relationships with parents. Could you explain that context, narcissism versus autism?
Totally. So I'll just talk about, you know, that's a really complex question. So I'll talk about,
Yes, of
I'll
course,
maybe talk about
most.
two things. No, you're good. I'll just talk about some different behaviors that autistic people do that look like narcissism but aren't. And so one of them is that we tend to, you know, we're we communicate differently and we love the subjects we love and we info dump and all these things. And so sometimes it can look like we are all inclusive, all involved in ourselves, and we
Right.
only care about ourselves and things like that. But no, it's that we have more narrow and deep interests. And so that's one of the things is a lot of people think like you're just talking about yourself all the time and like,
I
you
see.
know what I'm saying? You're just talking about things you're interested in and stuff like that. And it's like, no, this is just sort of like, you know, this is my way of being. And it's not that I'm not interested in you and your things. It's that I need some help to understand the context about why you're interested in
Right.
things or what you like and stuff like that. So we just need a little bit more assistance there. Whereas narcissists
Right.
really don't. Yeah. I mean, they just are the grandiosity thing. It's the grandiosity thing that it's like autistic people are actually competent in these things and are maybe obsessed with these things just because it's an interest and like a personality type of thing. But narcissists will, you know, I'm the best. I know everything. I know this. I know that. But maybe there's not like meat behind that.
So is there like, so like to parse it, is one based on sincerity and the other is based on kind of deception? So like if somebody autistic is going on about something they love, that's mostly because they're very interested and they're very almost immersed in it.
Yeah.
The intention. And it seems like with narcissism, it's very deceptive and self-serving. So I think maybe it's based on more how other people perceive them rather than where I think maybe, I would imagine with narcissism, I think there's probably a lot of self-deception involved too. You probably don't really get to know yourself. If let's say if for instance, you're really into cryptocurrency and there's another woman who's also very much into, you know, cryptocurrency. So let's say if you were to go and let's say, you know, digress, expand upon it in a conversation. Let's say it's like a 5 or 6 hour conversation.
Yeah.
That might just stem from you, kind of just the wheels going all the time, just getting deeper and deeper into the subject matter. So that might just be an expression of just enthusiasm.
Exactly.
But some people might just really get into it because it's the cool thing right now. So, okay, maybe this is what makes me seem interesting, you know, right now.
It's like more of a social projection. It's a great thing, right? That's a great way of describing it. And how Dr. Sam Vaknin describes it is a true versus a false self. And so we need to talk about too, like the etiology of autism, of narcissism, because what creates narcissism is someone is not being seen properly, right? So that's really all in all, the person is not seen properly when they're younger. So that means there's two ways that can happen. When kids are over idealized, and when kids are put on a pedestal, and you know, you're so great, you're so amazing, but there's not like what's the why, right? It leads to people not, you know, overinflated sense of ego. It leads to an overinflated ego, and that causes narcissism. Another thing is just severe abuse. And so I'm talking like really severe, like physical abuse, bad. Often is what causes narcissism. And it's because, you know, I can't trust anyone but me. I am alone in this universe, essentially, and I have to create this false self to be loved. And it's this idealized, it's what happens is the narcissist, the brain believes I am not lovable. I am so small. I am not, you know what I mean?
So like
it's
a
really,
construct.
It's maladaptive. It's entirely maladaptive, but it's rooted in trauma. And so like Sam Vaknin is changing the world because he's talking about narcissism as a post-traumatic stress condition instead of a personality disorder. And if we view it through that lens, I know it's really brilliant. If we view it through that lens, it's treatable, right? Because trauma is treatable. If we understand the trauma, if we understand what's maladaptive, if we work to understand that, then we can accept our true self. And the narcissist is projecting perfection because it hates its true self, right? And in every sense of it. I mean, narcissists are very self-hating, self-loathing, very sad inside, and they're grasping at any sense of control through manipulation that they can, because they didn't have any of that. They're creating their own universe because they feel so unsafe in the real world because they had such horrific beginnings. So that's
it's amazing how much damage bad parenting has caused, throughout history.
Oh my God, yes.
And individuals, like you could trace things like narcissism, you could trace racism, you could trace so many bad things to just terrible parenting. It's really, it's really incredible.
Yeah, exactly. And it all comes back to actually beyond parenting, because it goes into every context, right? It goes into the school context and the relational. It's boundaries. It's a boundary issue, right? Yeah. It's a boundary issue. People have to understand the boundaries within which they operate and what's okay, what's not okay.
Right.
And when there's no boundaries, there's so much ambiguity. It's so muddy, and yeah, of course you'd have kind of a defective way of operating.
Right.
So I think boundaries are the most important thing ever.
Incredible. And by the way, this has been an excellent conversation. And to wrap up the show, I do have a very important question to ask you. Okay. So
I hope I can answer it.
People, I think you will. I think you will. So for people who are struggling, or at least trying to figure out if they have autism, based on collective experiences between childhood and adulthood, listening to the show, listening to your input, what would you suggest as far as how they start that journey? And by the way, I think a lot of it has to do with healing inside and out, because I'm sure there's kind of, I think there has to be a degree of self-consciousness, maybe even self-hating behaviors, so to say. So for somebody who's brave enough to disclose this and reveal this self, you've obviously helped out a lot of people, without a doubt. People probably wouldn't otherwise do this. So what advice would you give to that person starting off in this journey of self-discovery and accepting it, and maybe even encouraging it, and you could even say being proud of it and looking at it as an asset in your life?
Yeah, beautiful question. So I will say something that's really important, especially early on in the journey, and really at any point of the journey, is knowing what resources are good and what are bad, right? Because in order to heal, you've got to be reading, you can't be reading the really sad articles about autism, right? That's not going to be helpful.
Right. Yes.
So that's the issue. I mean, even was my issue early on in being diagnosed. The reason why I'm starting a company and I did the TikTok and everything is I'm like, where's the relatable information about autism that's empowering?
Yeah.
And that is story-based.
That's important. What's empowering right there?
Yes. What's empowering versus disempowering, right? And so I will say my favorite source is embrace-autism.com. It's my favorite source. And there you can you can actually get diagnosed with autism or ADHD, but you can take all of the assessments that you would be taking in your formal assessment. She makes those accessible. She is really, Dr. Natalie Engelbrecht has changed the lives of millions of people. Truly, I know this because I broke her website several times. At least one time I broke her website by sending so many people there. I had a video get 2.5 million views, and I linked it to her website, and it crashed.
Right.
So if people would go to my TikTok and follow me at ActuallyAlex with 3 underscores in between, I have a link tree, and I can give you the link tree link, Adam, because that has everything you need to.
Give me that, and I'll repost it on my stuff.
Yeah, because in there you can see there's stories in there. There's links to to all of these different articles about all of these different things. You can read about CPTSD. You can read about the DSM-1 criteria in a positive light. You can read the reframing of it, which is really what will help people identify with it. So I have so many great resources in that link tree, and I think that would be an amazing start.
Yeah, I'll repost that for sure. And listen, Alex, it was an absolute pleasure having you on today.
Yeah, this was such a fantastic conversation.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it. And I would have to say, even beyond the great insights you provided, I think for people listening to this, I think you may have done some good and helped out many from disclosing this, because I think that's what it takes a lot of times. If you're able to comfortably talk about it, I think it does embolden and it does inspire others to go and start troubleshooting, but also being able to kind of learn to live with it, and maybe even and perhaps be empowered.
Design around it. Design with it in mind.
Right.
Yeah.
Because let's say if this was some sort of interview or some sort of radio program from 30 years ago, this might have not have been the most popular conversation to have, to look at this as an asset, to be empowered by it.
True.
And I think part of it has to do with where culture was and maybe where scientific research was about it. But, as we've all discussed on the show, many of the great people throughout history, and I'm talking about Nobel Prize winners,
Literally.
I'm talking about scientists, literally,
Yeah.
these are names that you all know. And these are all people who had different ways of conceptualizing the world and abstract thinking that really came up with out-of-the-box creations, solutions, and achievements for things.
Yeah.
So listen, be sure to check out Alex's content. Like I said, it has a huge following. This is 351K plus and growing, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So for people, willing, and I think people who are ready to take that step, check out Alex's content. I'll be posting it up on my social media as well. Yeah. And Alex, I definitely have to have you back on for a follow-up episode. This was a great episode, and I think with the way the future is kind of coming about, being able to harness the talents of everybody wherever they are, neurologically speaking, whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent. People have to know how to play to their advantages. People have to know how to leverage their advantages. So if you are neurotypical or if you are neurodivergent, either way, this is life. Nobody gets out, without a scratch. So you got to know how to learn how to leverage really the hand that you're playing with right now. So, even if it is, let's say, neurodivergent, just keep in mind, you have a genuine set of skills and assets. You just got to learn how to play it right. That's my take from this anyway. So
no, you're absolutely right. And quoting Kanye West, better have a strategy or you could become a statistic.
Yeah. Listen, I'll drink to that. So.
And one other thing I would love to plug, I am doing, right now I'm accepting positions to do presentations for universities and for corporations. So I've done this quite a few times, and it's a great stigma smasher. And again, it really helps to educate all. So the way I've been doing this is I do organization-wide presentations where everybody comes, and it highlights them. It's kind of like a manager training and an employee training in one. But it's really fantastic, and people learn how to do these things that we're talking about. They learn to see themselves a little bit differently and see their neighbors a little bit differently. And it's a really fantastic talk. So I would love to, if you're somebody that works at an organization and is looking for a speaker, to come in for Autism Awareness Month. That's April. So I am doing those, and I find them to be really beneficial for people that have attended. A lot of people are finding out they're autistic through those presentations.
Right. And that's excellent, by the way. If you have like some sort of promo content for that, please send that my way.
Yeah, I will.
I can help get the word out for that. More than happy to.
Thank you so much. I would love to. Thank you, Adam.
Anytime.
Thanks for having me.
Alex, thank you for coming on. It was an absolute pleasure. Let's have a follow-up episode to this in the near future. And, I think given how chaotic the world is in 2022, like I said, we got to figure out, people have to figure out in the best way, most efficient way possible. And I know I talk about efficiency all the time, but seriously, work smarter, not harder. Yeah. How do you play to your advantages with whatever hand you have? With wherever you are on the spectrum, neurotypical or neurodivergent, let's learn how to empower and give people tools. Let's make that follow-up episode about that, and let's get into the weeds even further.
That's a great idea. That's a fantastic idea. Let's definitely do that. I'm down.
All right. Well, Alex, listen, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you so much for coming on, and we will definitely be talking soon.
Yes. Thank you, Adam. So fantastic. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.